I can still picture the day Jack strolled into my life like it was just yesterday. I was in a tiny cafe, sipping on their cheapest coffee and trying to sort out my thoughts. Then he walked in, looking like he stepped out of a movie scene. No fancy lights or music, just the jingle of the doorbell and the smell of stale coffee mingled with his aftershave. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked, flashing me a charming smile and pointing to the empty chair across from me. "Go ahead," I said, trying to play it cool despite my surprise at his sudden appearance. We hit it off right away, like two peas in a pod. We had the same interests, from binge-watching cheesy TV shows to arguing over the best pizza topping, pineapple, no doubt. Soon, we were serious about each other, not just casually hanging out. It felt like we had known each other forever. And before we knew it, marriage was on the table. But then came the tough part. Let me tell you, his parents were a handful. Meeting them for the first time was like stepping into a lion's den with a juicy steak strapped to my back. They had this way of smiling while silently judging you, deciding if you were up to par or not. "You're the one Jack can't stop talking about, huh?" his mom said, her tone more frosty than friendly. "Yep, that's me," I replied, trying my best not to let her intimidating aura get under my skin. His parents wasted no time in expressing their desire for us to sign a prenup. I wasn't interested in their money, but their approach left a sour taste in my mouth. "I'll sign your prenup," I told them. "But here's the catch. If one of us cheats, the cheater owes $200,000. Jack looked stunned, like I'd slapped him with a wet fish. "Babe, I'd never cheat on you," he insisted, his expression dead serious. "Yeah, well, my ex said the same thing before I caught him cheating," I shot back. It was either this deal or nothing. Jack eventually agreed, though his parents didn't seem too thrilled about it. We figured that settled the matter, but we were in for a surprise. One evening, we were cozied up on our old squeaky couch. We always talked about replacing it, but it held too many memories to let go. The TV droned on in the background, but we were too wrapped up in planning our dream trip to Switzerland. We knew it would stretch our budget thin, but we were determined to make it happen. "Picture it, Jack. The food, the wine, the art. We have to go," I exclaimed, excitement lighting up my eyes. Jack chuckled and pulled me closer. "Linda, you had me at food, but let's face it, our bank account is more suited for backyard camping than a fancy trip to Geneva." I nudged him teasingly. "Then we'll save up. We'll cut back on things we don't really need, like your video games." He feigned shock. "Not the video games. Take my shirts, my shoes, even my beloved coffee maker, but spare the games." We shared a laugh. That was us in a nutshell, dreaming big while staying grounded in our simple life. And we were content. Our happiness didn't just lie in grand adventures, it was also in the everyday moments like Jack's attempts at cooking breakfast on Saturdays. He wasn't a culinary master, but he had somehow perfected scrambled eggs and toast, which he proudly served with his less than perfect coffee. "I'm feeling scrambled eggs today. What do you think?" he'd ask, already making his way to the kitchen. "Only if you promise not to burn the toast this time," I'd tease back, adding, "and I'm taking charge of the coffee." One day, as we tackled the dishes together, a mundane chore that felt special because we did it side by side, Jack broached a topic we'd been avoiding. "Linda, we need to talk about, starting a family," he said, breaking the comfortable silence. I paused, holding a plate in my hands. "I know it's just scary, isn't it? What if it doesn't happen for us?" Jack turned to me, drying his hands on a towel. "Then we'll face it together. But we won't know until we try, right? How hard can it be?" He chuckled, a mix of nerves and affection in his tone. Famous last words, huh? But that's us. Whatever life threw at us, we tackled it together. Even when his mom started dropping hints about wanting grandchildren every chance she got, we handled it. "Linda, dear, when are you going to give me some grandbabies? You're not getting any younger, she'd say, her tone sugary but her message clear as day. I'd hold my tongue, flash a smile, and chirp, "We're on it, right, Jack?" And he'd chime in, "Mom, chill out, okay? These things don't happen overnight." But as time passed, the pressure mounted. It wasn't just from his mom, but from us too. We longed for a family, but it wasn't falling into place as easily as we'd hoped. Since Sophia found a new hobby in making my life tough, our home felt like a war zone. her sharp words the main ammo. It all boiled over during one Sunday lunch meant to be serene and easygoing. Right on cue, Sophia barged in uninvited just as we were about to dig in. The atmosphere turned tense the moment she stepped in, her eyes scanning the room like she was inspecting a battleground. "Well, isn't this a quaint little setup?" she sneered, eyeing the modest meal I'd whipped up. "Quite the effort, Linda. Looks like you've been slaving away in the kitchen all morning." Trying to keep the peace, I mustered a smile. "It's nothing fancy, Sophia. Just something simple and quick. Please, take a seat." As we settled at the table, she launched into her usual spiel. "You know, Linda," Sophia began, her tone dripping with condescension, "I was chatting with Mrs. Charlotte the other day, and she mentioned how her grandson just became a dad. It got me thinking, when are you and Jack going to give me some good news? Time's ticking, you know." My cheeks flushed with a mix of embarrassment and frustration. I glanced at Jack, hoping for some backup, but he suddenly seemed very engrossed in his meal. "Mom, seriously?" Jack finally mumbled, but it lacked conviction, and we all knew it. Undeterred, Sophia pressed on. "I hate to be blunt, but you're not getting any younger. You work hard for your money. Why waste it on Linda if she can't fulfill her basic duties as a wife? Hiring help for cleaning and cooking would be much more efficient, don't you think?" That was the last straw. "Sophia, I'm doing my best here," I blurted out. "It's not like I don't want kids. And as for the house and cooking, I didn't realize marriage came with a job description." Sophia scoffed. "Marriage isn't a free ride, Linda. You have responsibilities, and frankly, you're not meeting them." The air grew heavy with tension, and tears threatened to spill from my eyes. But what hurt the most wasn't Sophia's harsh words. It was Jack's silence. When he finally spoke, it wasn't in my defense. "Mom's right, maybe we should consider getting some extra help around here. It would take some weight off your shoulders too," he suggested. His words felt like a stab in the back. It was clear I was alone in this. In the days that followed, Sophia's visits became more frequent and her criticisms sharper. She'd scrutinize every corner of the house, pointing out any flaw. "You call this clean?" she'd sneer. "Looks like a pigsty to me." Then came the jabs about my appearance. "Is that what you're wearing? A wife should dress to please her husband. No wonder Jack seems exhausted. He comes home to this." I tried to stand up for myself. "Sophia, I dress for myself, not Jack. And he's tired because he works hard, not because of my outfit." But it was pointless. Sophia had made up her mind about me, and nothing I said seemed to make a difference. Jack's lack of support hit me the hardest. Every night after his mom's departure, we'd end up arguing. "Why won't you defend me, Jack? She's bulldozing over us, and you're just standing by." "Linda, she's set in her ways. What do you expect me to do, kick my own mom out?" "No, but I expect you to be my partner, to stand with me, not her." It became evident that this went beyond Sophia's disapproval. It was about us, our marriage, and whether we could withstand the onslaught of Sophia's criticisms. As weeks passed, it dawned on me that this wasn't just a passing phase, it was a full-blown assault. If we didn't take action soon, there might not be anything left to salvage. Things between Jack and me had turned frosty ever since Sophia ramped up her criticisms. But it wasn't just our home life feeling the strain. Jack himself had started behaving oddly, and it wasn't solely because of work stress. There was something else, something unsettling. It all began with his phone. Jack used to be open about it, we had no secrets. But then he began leaving the room whenever he received a call. And it was always from the same person, Paul Work. One evening, I tried to sound nonchalant and asked, "Who's Paul Work?" Jack visibly tensed up, a clear sign of nervousness. "Oh, just a new guy at the office. Asks a lot of questions," he replied. But there were more changes. Jack, who never cared much about fashion, suddenly started paying attention to his appearance. The graphic tees and worn-out jeans disappeared, replaced by crisp shirts, slacks, and even cologne. "Since when did you start smelling like a department store?" I teased one morning, watching him style his hair differently. He just smirked. "Can't a guy mix things up every once in a while? No harm in that, right?" Then there were the late nights at work, becoming more frequent. "Another long one, babe," he texted. "Sorry, this project is a killer. I'll be home soon, I promise," he reassured. But it would be well past midnight before I heard his keys jingle in the door. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It lingered like a shadow. That's when I made the decision to hire a private investigator. It felt like a scene from a cheesy TV show, but I needed to know for certain. The evidence arrived in a plain brown envelope. Heartbreaking yet undeniable. Photos of Jack with another woman, their intimacy unmistakable, captured in moments that shattered our years together. But it was the recording that cut the deepest. Their conversations filled with affection and plans made it painfully clear. He was in love with her, or at least with someone else. I sat there, staring at the damning evidence before me, a chilling reality sinking in. This could be the key I needed if our marriage spiraled into a messy divorce. The photos captured stolen moments from our life together, while the recorded words betrayed every "I love you" he ever whispered in my ear. But I kept it all to myself, a heavy burden I chose to carry alone. I wasn't ready to confront him, not yet. I needed time to strategize, to navigate the collapse of our marriage while preserving my dignity. The days that followed passed in a blur. Jack maintained his facade, and I played the part of the dutiful wife, smiling outwardly while crumbling inside. Our conversations became a delicate dance around the truth, each word carefully chosen, every laugh forced. "Are you okay?" Jack would inquire, genuine concern lacing his voice. "Yeah, just tired, you know. Work's been hectic," I'd respond, the lie bitter on my tongue. It seemed like just another ordinary day until I accidentally overheard a conversation that would change everything. As I passed by Jack's office, the door slightly ajar, their voices drifted out. It was Jack and his mother, Sophia, and their conversation wasn't casual. Their tones were serious, filled with purpose. "I can't keep this up, Mom. It's not just about having kids anymore. I don't feel the same way about Linda. It's like we're living together as strangers, not as a married couple," Jack admitted, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Sophia's reply was cutting. "Well, can you blame yourself? She hasn't given you a child. And what else has she really brought to this marriage? But let's not be hasty. My 65th birthday is approaching, and we wouldn't want to miss out on a generous gift from her, would we?" Her cynicism felt like a stab in the heart. They were using me, planning to keep me around just long enough to benefit from a lavish birthday present before discarding me. "Exactly, dear. Just a bit longer," Sophia affirmed, her words dripping with malice. I stood there, stunned and furious. They were plotting to push me out of the family as effortlessly as crossing off an item on a shopping list. The pain ran deep, but it fueled a burning desire for vengeance within me. They thought they could manipulate me and discard me at their convenience. I was determined to prove that I wasn't just a pawn in their twisted game. A few days later, we gathered for a family dinner that felt more like a scripted performance than a meal. Sophia brought up her impending birthday with a smile that made my stomach churn. Leaning in, she asked, "So, Linda dear, what do you have planned for my birthday? Something special, I hope." I met her gaze calmly. "Actually, Sophia, I've been thinking of arranging a dinner at the city's most luxurious restaurant, an unforgettable evening." Her eyes gleamed with anticipation, and she exchanged a satisfied glance with Jack. They believed they had me cornered, but they didn't realize I was already 2 steps ahead. "Oh, Linda, that sounds lovely. Just close family, you know, keep it intimate," Sophia cooed, her voice oozing with insincerity. "Absolutely, Sophia. We'll make it a memorable occasion," I replied, the words leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. The weeks leading up to Sophia's 65th birthday felt like a slow march towards a reckoning. Every smirk from her and every indifferent nod from Jack fueled my resolve. My plan was straightforward yet daring. Orchestrate a lavish dinner as a supposed gesture of affection, then unveil a monumental surprise. As with all well-laid plans, the devil was in the details. The night before the party, our home crackled with tension. Jack, oblivious to the storm brewing, lounged casually on the couch, absorbed in his phone. "Everything ready for tomorrow?" he inquired, still glued to the screen. "You could say that," I replied, my voice masking the turmoil within. The day arrived, and as guests streamed into the opulent dining room we had reserved for Sophia's celebration, anticipation hung heavy in the air. My pulse quickened, not from nerves, but from the excitement of what was to come. Sophia, relishing the spotlight, luxuriated in the grandeur of her surroundings. "Oh, Linda, you've truly outdone yourself. This place is divine," she proclaimed loudly enough for neighboring tables to hear. As we settled in, the evening unfolded with the peculiar cheer typical of family gatherings. Laughter rang out, stories were shared. Then, as the dessert plates were whisked away, the waiter approached with the climax of the evening. The bill. He leaned in discreetly and murmured the staggering dinner costs. $66,000. I handed over my credit card, my action going unnoticed by most. Then, with a strained smirk, Jack decided to drop his bombshell. Linda, it's time for the truth. I'm done with this, with us. I want a divorce. His words hung heavily in the air, suffocating the room. Before I could fully process his announcement, Sophia, sharp and unyielding, interjected. Well then, now that's out in the open, it's best you leave, Linda. Tonight is about family, and well, you're no longer part of ours. The room fell into a hushed silence, every gaze fixed on me, awaiting my response. But I refused to crumble. With a composure I didn't truly feel, I rose from my seat, nodded, and departed without a word. The chill of the night air slapped against my skin as I made my way home, the weight of finality crashing over me in waves. By the time I reached Arno's apartment, I had a plan. I gathered my essentials, my numbness morphing into steely determination. This was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. As I sealed my last suitcase, my phone buzzed incessantly. Initially, I ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me, and Sophia's voice erupted from the other end. Linda, the payment didn't go through. You need to fix this right away, Sophia's voice demanded. The irony was bittersweet. In my preparations, I had blocked access to the shared account, anticipating it would be Jack's first move. Oh, Sophia, what a shame. But since I'm no longer considered part of the family, as you've made abundantly clear, I'm afraid you'll have to handle this matter on your own. Her indignation crackled through the phone, but it was a symphony to my ears. The ensuing chaos was a fitting conclusion to the charade my marriage had become. I heard tales of the restaurant staff demanding payment, Sophia's escalating fits, and eventually the police being called to defuse the situation she had incited. In the end, it was Jack and his kin who scrambled to settle the bill. A poetic retribution for the betrayal and indignity they had subjected me to. The morning after the dinner felt like emerging from a tempest. Armed with my plan, my determination, and a stack of divorce papers in hand, I returned to what once was our shared abode for the final time. The atmosphere was tense, palpable, as if it could be sliced with a blade. Jack and Sophia stood there, seemingly embroiled in a heated exchange. Their animosity toward me seemed to merge into a unified front of fury upon my arrival. You've got some nerve showing your face here after last night, Jack spat, his features twisted in a mixture of anger and disbelief. Quick to echo his sentiment, Sophia hurled her own barbs. Ingrate, you've brought shame upon us in front of the entire city. Do you comprehend the humiliation of having the police summoned on account of your actions? People were laughing, filming. I met their fury with a composure I hardly felt. Shame? Is that your primary concern right now? I retorted, tossing the divorce papers onto the table, placing the incriminating photos of Jack's infidelity atop them. Perhaps you should direct your attention to this instead. Jack's complexion drained of color as he picked up the damning photographs, with his mother looming over his shoulder. Their rage dissolved into shock, then morphed into panic as they comprehended the gravity of the situation. And let's not overlook the prenup, shall we? I pressed on, my voice unwavering. You stray, you pay, precisely $200,000. Sophia's features contorted into a snarl. You wouldn't dare. You can't do this to us. Oh, but I can, and I will, I retorted, my voice devoid of warmth, resolute in my decision. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, Jack altered his approach. Please, let's discuss this. We can find a solution. I couldn't suppress a bitter, mirthless laugh. Find a solution? You think a few words can undo everything? No, Jack, it's over. Sophia, ever the master manipulator, attempted to soften her stance, her tone dripping with false concern. Linda, darling, think about what you're doing. This will destroy us. That ship has sailed, Sophia. You should have considered that before. Their pleas shifted to desperate entreaties, their words a frantic attempt to salvage whatever remained. But my mind was resolute. I was done playing the victim, done with their deceit and manipulation. In the end, Jack had no recourse but to borrow money from his parents to settle with me. As I departed from that house for the final time, check in hand, I felt a burden lift from my shoulders. After all that transpired, I was finally liberated. I used the money from Jack to secure a down payment on a modest yet snug abode of my own. It's remarkable how much tranquility you can find in a residence that's solely yours, where each nook feels like a sanctuary away from the tumult of the past. Life is calmer now, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I have a job that keeps me occupied, amiable neighbors who offer nods and smiles, and a petite garden that's entirely mine to tend to. Occasionally, I catch wind of gossip concerning Jack and Sophia. Just the other day, while grabbing coffee from the local spot frequented by the community, I bumped into an acquaintance from the old neighborhood. After some polite chit-chat, they leaned in, lowering their voice, and whispered, "Hey, have you heard the latest scoop about your ex and his mom?" Their eyes gleamed with intrigue. I arched an eyebrow, intrigued yet detached. "Can't say that I have." "Do share." They seemed to relish divulging the news. Apparently, Sophia isn't too thrilled with Jack's new girlfriend. Rumor has it they're quarreling like there's no tomorrow. Puts your situation in a whole new light. We moved on from the topic, but as I strolled away with my coffee, I felt a profound sense of relief. There was a time when such news would have unsettled me, but now it's simply another chapter in someone else's tale. These days, my greatest worries revolve around whether my tomatoes will ripen before the squirrels snatch them, or if I'll ever master yoga without resembling a newborn deer on ice. Life is simpler, quieter, and considerably sweeter on this side of the chaos.
My world changed drastically when I was just 5. Dad had passed away from a sudden heart attack, and not long after, Mom decided to remarry. His name was George. He had a rough look and even a rougher way of talking, something that seemed to scare me right from the get-go. George brought not just his belongings into our little home, but his daughter, Liza, who was 2 years my senior and, as I'd soon find out, twice as mean. I remember the first time I met Liza. She had this smug smile plastered across her face, looking down at me as if I was some sort of bug she found amusing. "So, you're the baby of the house?" "Well, not anymore. Better get used to it," Liza sneered, her eyes scanning me like I was her new project to fix or break. Mom tried to make things sound all sugar-coated when she talked about them moving in. "Ella, honey, it's going to be wonderful to have a bigger family. Liza will be like the older sister you never had." But Liza was no sister to me. The first few days she moved in, she laid down the law, her law. My toys weren't mine anymore, they were ours, which meant they were hers whenever she wanted. And when I protested? Well, let's just say George didn't like that at all. "Ella, stop being selfish. Learn to share with your sister," he'd grumble, his voice deep and usually laced with annoyance. Mom never stood up to him. Whenever I went to her, hoping she'd take my side just this once, she'd always have the same old tired lines. "Ella, please. Just try a little harder to get along. For me, okay?" She'd plead, her eyes always looking a bit too tired, a bit too sad. Liza knew she had the upper hand, and she milked it every chance she got. If she broke something, somehow it was my fault. If she lost something, somehow I had stolen it. But one particular afternoon sticks out in my memory like a sore thumb. Liza had been particularly cruel that day, hiding my favorite doll and claiming she had no idea where it was. I found it later, tossed in the trash can outside. I remember holding the dirty, slightly torn doll as I walked into the house, tears streaming down my face. "Look what she did, Mom. Look." I cried, holding up the doll for her to see. Mom glanced at the doll, then at my tear-stained face, and for a moment, I thought she'd finally see my side. But then her eyes shifted towards the living room where George was sitting, watching TV. "Ella, maybe it was an accident. Just let it go, please," she whispered, her voice tense as she glanced nervously towards the living room. Liza just laughed from the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. "Crybaby," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for me to hear. That night, as I lay in bed clutching the now clean but still ripped doll, I realized that this was my new normal. Liza wasn't going anywhere, and neither was George. And Mom, well, she was there but not really there for me. Things took a sharper turn when Mom announced she was pregnant. I remember feeling a mix of emotions. A little brother or sister could mean someone else on my side, right? Wrong. It just meant more reasons for Mom and George to pay attention to anything but me. Tommy was born on a chilly morning in November. He was a quiet baby, hardly ever cried, but he needed constant attention, as all babies do. Mom was either feeding him, changing him, or trying to catch a few minutes of sleep. And George? Well, he was over the moon about having a son. Liza and I were pushed further to the back burner. But while I felt more isolated, Liza seemed to relish it. It was like she thrived on the chaos, knowing she could get away with anything as the focus wasn't on us anymore. One evening, I was trying to finish some homework at the kitchen table, struggling to concentrate over the sound of Tommy's fussing. Liza waltzed in, dropped her bag on the table, and scattered my papers everywhere. "Hey, I was using those," I snapped, my frustration peaking. "So? Move over, I need the table," Liza retorted, not even looking at me as she started to rummage through her bag. Before I could say anything else, George stormed into the kitchen. "What's all this noise about? Can't you see your mother's trying to get Tommy to sleep?" "Liza's trying to take over the table when I'm still using it," I said, standing my ground despite the knot in my stomach. George's face turned a shade I knew too well, and his voice was even and dangerous. "Ella, stop your complaining and go to your room. Let your sister use the table." "But Dad." "He's not your dad. Don't call him that." Liza cut in, her words sharp and biting. That stung more than I expected, and without another word, I grabbed my things and stormed off to my room, slamming the door behind me. I pressed my back against it, sliding down to the floor as I fought back tears. I felt so alone, cornered in a house that no longer felt like home. After that night, I learned to keep my head down. Liza took advantage, of course, always finding new ways to torment me when no one else was looking. George never did anything about it. If anything, he seemed to agree with whatever Liza said, which only made her bolder. "Shouldn't you be nicer to me? I mean, we're practically sisters." I once tried to reason with her, hoping to break through her tough exterior. Liza laughed, cold and harsh. "We're not sisters. We're not even friends. Remember that." And I did. Every single day that I lived in that house, I remembered. My room became my sanctuary, the only place I felt somewhat safe. But even there, the sounds of a happy family, a family that didn't include me, filtered through the walls, a constant reminder of where I stood. As soon as I finished high school, I knew I had to get out. Staying in that house wasn't an option anymore. It was suffocating, like trying to breathe underwater. So, I moved to the city. It was a fresh start, a chance to be who I wanted to be without anyone hovering over me, dictating what I could or couldn't do. The first few weeks were tough. I remember walking into my tiny studio apartment for the first time, feeling a mix of excitement and terror. It was all on me now. No more Liza, no more George, just Ella, trying to make it on her own. I found a job at a local cafe to pay the bills and signed up for a nail technician course. Nails were something I always loved doing, a creative outlet that let me escape the real world for a bit. The course was tougher than I expected. The instructor, Mrs. Jenkins, was a stickler for perfection. "If you're going to do it right," she'd often say, peering over her glasses as she inspected our work. I pushed through, got my license, and started looking for a place to set up shop. The perfect spot turned out to be a small room on the ground floor of an old building. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The landlady, Mrs. Petrov, was a tough old bird who'd seen it all. When I went to sign the lease, she eyed me skeptically. "You sure you can handle this, girlie? It's a tough business." I met her gaze, my resolve firm. "Yes, Mrs. Petrov. I can handle it." She grunted, handing over the keys. "We'll see. Pay your rent on time, and we won't have any problems." Starting my own business was brutal. Money was tight, and there were days I barely made enough to cover lunch. But slowly, word got out. My clients liked my work, and they started bringing their friends. Positive reviews trickled in, and with each one, my confidence grew. Just when I thought I had everything figured out, life decided to throw me a curveball. It was a typical busy Tuesday when my phone rang, the screen flashing mom, which usually meant something was up. I took a deep breath before answering. "Hi, Mom. What's up?" I tried to keep my tone light, but I was already bracing for whatever was coming. "Ella, sweetheart, I hope you're sitting down. I have a favor to ask," Mom began, her voice shaky, which immediately put me on edge. "I'm at work, Mom. What's going on?" I wiped my hands on a towel, stepping into the back room of my salon. "It's about your sister, Liza. She's moving to your city and needs a place to stay, just for a little while, until she finds a job," Mom explained, her words rushing out like she wanted to get it over with as quickly as possible. I felt my stomach drop. "Liza? Mom, are you serious?" There was a heavy sigh from her end. I know it's a lot to ask, but she's trying to start over, Ella. She's changed, she really has." The idea of living with Liza again made my skin crawl, but hearing the pleading in Mom's voice, I was torn. "I don't know, Mom. Please, Ella. For me? It won't be for long, I promise." And just like that, I found myself agreeing to let Liza stay. "Fine, but just for a little while, okay?" "Thank you, darling. I'll let her know." The next day, Liza arrived at my doorstep with 2 suitcases and a smile that looked too sweet to be genuine. "Hey, Ella. Long time, no see, huh? Thanks for letting me crash here. I really appreciate it," she chirped, stepping inside before I could even respond. "Yeah, sure. Let's just make sure it's temporary, okay?" I said, eyeing her suitcases with suspicion. Liza laughed, a bit too loudly. "Of course. I'll be out of your hair before you know it." The first week wasn't as bad as I expected. Liza seemed like she was really trying to make an effort. She cleaned up after herself, made small talk, and even offered to split groceries. "So, how's the job hunt going?" I asked one evening as we shared a surprisingly pleasant dinner. Good. I've got a couple of interviews lined up next week," Liza replied, sounding optimistic. "That's great. Just remember, you can't stay here forever," I reminded her, not wanting her to get too comfortable. Liza nodded, her expression serious. "I know, Ella. And thanks again. I know I wasn't the best sister back in the day, but I'm trying to make things right." I wanted to believe her, I really did. But there was always that nagging doubt in the back of my mind, remembering all the times she had deceived me before. As days turned into weeks, I noticed a shift in Liza's behavior. She started coming home late, missing her interviews, and hanging out with a questionable crowd. The old Liza was resurfacing. "Liza, we need to talk," I finally said one night after she stumbled in past midnight. "What's up?" Liza slurred slightly, clearly having had a few drinks. "This isn't working. You said you'd look for a job, but all you're doing is partying. You need to get it together or find somewhere else to live," I said firmly, my patience wearing thin. Liza rolled her eyes, her old defiance flashing. "Chill, Ella. I'll get a job. Just relax." But I couldn't relax. Not with her in my house, disrupting the peace I had worked so hard to build. Liza's promises of job hunting had quickly dissolved into late nights and shady new friends who seemed to pop in and out of my apartment like it was a downtown bar. My patience was wearing thin, and I was close to kicking her out when I met Alex at a friend's party. Alex was different from anyone I'd ever met. He was genuine and seemed genuinely interested in what I did for a living, unlike most guys who glossed over it once they heard nail technician. "So, you really run your own business? That's pretty impressive," Alex said as we sat tucked away in a quieter corner of the noisy living room. "Yeah, it's been a wild ride, but I love it. It's mine, you know?" I replied, feeling a spark of pride flicker within. We started seeing each other, and things were going great, except for one thing, Liza. She had taken an unsettling interest in Alex. At first, it was just lingering looks, but then she started making excuses to stick around whenever he came over. It wasn't long before I caught her trying to be a little too friendly. One evening, I came home earlier than usual to find Liza draped a bit too close to Alex on the sofa, laughing at something he said. The scene made my blood boil. "Having fun?" I asked, my voice sharp as I dropped my keys on the counter a little louder than necessary. Liza jumped up, a guilty flush on her face. "Oh, hey, Ella. We were just chatting, getting to know each other better." Alex looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting between Liza and me. "Yeah, just talking. Ella, can we chat for a sec?" I nodded, pulling him aside into the kitchen. Once out of earshot, I didn't waste time. "What was that all about?" Alex rubbed the back of his neck, looking genuinely confused. "I'm not sure. She's been really forward lately." I didn't want to say anything. I didn't know how to handle it without making things weird for you. Determined to put an end to it, I confronted Liza later that night. "We need to talk, now," I said, standing at the entrance of her room. She looked up, feigning innocence. "What's up?" "You know what? This thing with Alex? It ends now. He's not interested, Liza. Back off," I stated bluntly, my tone broking no argument. Liza's face twisted into a sneer. "Oh, come on, Ella. What's the harm in a little fun? Alex doesn't seem to mind." That was the last straw. I couldn't have her in my apartment any longer. "Pack your stuff. You need to leave. First thing tomorrow," I said firmly. Liza looked stunned, finally realizing I was serious. "You can't kick me out. Where will I go?" "That's not my problem. You should have thought of that before," I replied, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. It hurt, but it was necessary. The next morning, Liza left. She was out of my life again, and this time I hoped it was for good. As she walked out the door, her parting shot was, "You'll regret this, Ella. I promise you that." As the wedding day approached, the air was thick with excitement and a bit of last-minute chaos. Alex's mom, Janet, who used a wheelchair, had become more like family to me. We'd spent countless afternoons together, chatting and planning the wedding. "I always hoped Alex would find someone who cares as much as you do, Ella. You're a blessing to us," Janet would often say with a warm smile, making me feel all the more welcomed and loved in this new family. The day of the wedding rehearsal finally came, and our close friends and relatives gathered at the venue. Everyone was buzzing with happiness, everyone except for one, Liza. When she arrived, wearing a dress that was way too revealing for a family gathering, I felt my stomach churn. She sauntered around Alex, laughing too loudly at his jokes, touching his arm every chance she got. My heart pounded with annoyance, and I could feel Alex's discomfort. "I need a minute," I muttered to Alex and pulled him aside, out of earshot from the others. "I can't stand watching her hang all over you. It's disrespectful, and it's supposed to be our special day." Alex took my hands in his expression softening. "Hey, look at me. Nothing she does changes how I feel about you. Okay? She's background noise, that's all." I nodded, trying to calm down, when Liza's laughter echoed across the room, slicing through the chatter like a knife. I snapped. Striding over to where Liza was standing, I fixed her with a glare that I hoped would melt steel. "Liza, you need to leave. Now," I said, my voice louder than intended, drawing a few curious glances from the guests. Liza's eyes widened, but she didn't make a scene. Instead, she scoffed, flipped her hair over her shoulder, and walked out without another word. Relief washed over me as I watched her leave. Turning back to the gathering, I caught my mom's eye. She approached, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "What was that all about?" Mom asked, her voice low. "I don't want her here, Mom. Not today, not at the wedding. She's done enough damage," I said, my voice firm. Mom nodded, her eyes softening. "I understand, honey. And well, there's something you should know about George. He and I are divorced. He turned out to be much worse than we thought, especially after the drinking got bad. He's not just out of my life, he's out of ours completely." My mind reeled. And Liza? She's on her own now. George had a stroke and can barely manage, she's looking after him. They're not our concern anymore, Ella, Mom added, almost as if she were convincing herself too. The drama was behind us, and all that was left was to look forward to the beginning of a new chapter with Alex, free from the shadows of the past. The first year of marriage had flown by, seemingly perfect, with me setting up a small space in our apartment to continue my nail business. It was an ideal setup. I could work while still being there for Janet, my mother-in-law, who needed daily care due to her disability. Things seemed to be going well, until I started noticing a change in Alex. He began working late more often and his business trips became more frequent. At first, I thought it was just the strain of new responsibilities at work, but then I began to feel the distance between us growing. And my worries only deepened the day I overheard Janet talking on the phone while I was setting up my tools for a client. "Yes, my dear, I'm so excited. A grandson will be such a joy." She chuckled into the receiver. I paused, my heart skipping a beat. I was definitely not pregnant. Something didn't add up. After her call, I approached her, trying to sound casual. "Janet, who's having a grandson? Did I hear you right?" She looked up, startled, then flushed a deep red. "Oh, just messing with my old friend, dear. You know, making her jealous." It sounded off. Way off. My gut twisted with suspicion, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. One of my regular clients, Maria, who used to work as a PI, still had all her contacts. "Maria, I need to find out what's going on. Can you help me?" I asked during her appointment. "Of course, Ella. Give me a few days. I'll dig around and see what I can find," she assured me, her tone serious and professional. It didn't take long for Maria to get back to me with news that felt like a punch to the gut. Alex was having an affair. And not just with anyone, with Liza. She was pregnant. I felt a cold calm settle over me as I processed the betrayal. I didn't confront Alex. Instead, I waited, gathering my strength for what came next. The opportunity presented itself when Alex walked through the door with a set of divorce papers in his hand. "Ella, I'm sorry, but this just isn't working. I've met someone else," he said bluntly, his eyes not meeting mine. "Oh? And who might that be, Alex?" I asked, my voice steady, despite the storm raging inside me. "It's Liza. She's expecting my child. She's exciting, Ella." You've just become too predictable, too dull," he admitted coldly. "Pack your stuff." I signed the papers then and there, handing them back to him with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Before I go, Alex, just one last thing." He looked at me, confused. "What?" "Liza will be bringing her father with her." "Did she tell you that?" "He had a stroke and can't take care of himself. And he's got debts, massive ones, from the divorce settlement with my mother." "Good luck handling that," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth but necessary. Alex's face paled. "What? No, she didn't mention any. And there's more. I've filed a lawsuit for adultery. With proof. You'll be hearing from my lawyer," I continued, cutting him off. As I walked out, the cool air hit my face, and I felt a sense of freedom. The pain of betrayal still stung, but I knew I was moving towards something better. Something that was truly meant for me. After the dust settled from the divorce, the settlement from Alex and Liza was substantial enough that I could finally open my own nail salon, a dream I had shelved in the quieter corners of my mind for too long. The grand opening of Ella's Elegance was a hit. The local newspaper even covered the event, and the community support was overwhelming. I hired a few skilled technicians, and we quickly became a favorite in town for our meticulous work and calming atmosphere. One quiet afternoon, while I was sorting through some inventory in the back, my mom called. I always looked forward to our talks. They were the little moments of peace in my often hectic days. "Hi, Mom, what's up?" I asked, smiling as I paused to sit down. Oh, nothing much. I just heard from an old friend of mine. Liza had her baby, she said hesitantly, probably expecting me to react negatively. Instead, I found myself smiling, genuinely hoping that child brought her more joy than she had brought to others. That's good to hear, Mom. I hope they're both healthy. Speaking of which, I've got a little surprise for Alex that I think will close this chapter of my life for good. A couple of days later, I received a call from Alex that I had been half expecting, half dreading. He sounded desperate and defeated, a far cry from the competent man who had handed me divorce papers. Ella, I received the documents from you. He started, his voice shaky. I can't believe it. Liza's child. I'm not the father? His voice cracked with the question. You're not surprised? You shouldn't be. You know what kind of person she is, I replied, my words deliberate and cold. There was a heavy silence before he continued. Ella, she's gone. I kicked her and her father out. It's been hell. Can we forget all this? Start over? I need you, Ella, he pleaded. The words might have tugged at my heartstrings once, but that time was long gone. Alex, you don't need me. You need a caretaker and a way to pay your debts. I'm not falling for that again. Take care of yourself, I said firmly before hanging up the phone. Sitting back in my chair, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The last tie to a painful past had been cut, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe freely. I'm Carla, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the afterthought in my family. It wasn't always obvious, but looking back, the signs were there from the start. My younger sister Sarah burst into the world like a supernova, all golden curls and dimpled smiles. From day one, she had our parents wrapped around her little finger. Me? I was the quiet one, more interested in my chemistry set than in making friends. I still remember my 10th birthday. I'd been hoping for a new microscope, dropping hints for weeks. Instead, I got a frilly dress that made me look like a cupcake. But Mom, I hate dresses, I protested. Nonsense, you'll look just like Sarah, she beamed, completely missing the point. As we grew older, the divide only widened. Sarah breezed through school on charm and good looks, while I buried myself in books and science experiments. Did you hear? Sarah's been nominated for prom queen. Mom gushed over dinner one night. That's great, I mumbled, trying to muster some enthusiasm. I won first place in the science fair today. Oh, that's nice, dear, Dad said absently, already turning back to Sarah. So, Princess, have you picked out your dress yet? And so it went, year after year. My achievements, no matter how significant, were always overshadowed by Sarah's latest triumph, no matter how trivial. The state science fair in my senior year was my moment to shine. I'd spent months perfecting my project on sustainable biofuels. When they announced the winners, I could hardly believe my ears. First place goes to Carla Johnson. I was ecstatic. Finally, something even my parents couldn't ignore. Or so I thought. That's great, honey, Mom said distractedly when I told her the news. But we can't make it to the awards ceremony. Sarah has a dance recital that day, and you know how important that is to her. I watched them fuss over Sarah's costume and makeup, my trophy gathering dust on a shelf. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but one I was getting used to. When the acceptance letters started rolling in, I could barely contain my excitement. Full scholarship to a prestigious university? It was more than I dared to hope for. Mom, Dad, I got in. I burst into the living room, waving the letter. Full ride and everything. Mom glanced up from her magazine. That's nice, dear. Sarah, didn't you say you needed help picking out a prom dress? Just like that, my big moment was brushed aside. Again. But, it's a full scholarship, I tried again, my voice smaller this time. Dad patted my shoulder absently. Good job, Kiddo. Sarah, princess, let's go shopping. Can't have you showing up to prom in just anything, can we? I watched them pile into the car, my acceptance letter crumpled in my fist. It was a familiar feeling, but it still stung. Despite the lack of fanfare from my family, I packed my bags and headed off to college with high hopes. For the first time, I was free from Sarah's shadow, free to be just Carla. College was a revelation. Suddenly, my passion for science wasn't weird or nerdy, it was respected, even admired. I threw myself into my studies with renewed vigor, determined to make the most of this opportunity. Meanwhile, Sarah followed the path our parents had always dreamed of. She enrolled in the local community college, more interested in parties than classes. College is so hard, she whined during one of our rare phone calls. I don't know how you do it, Carla. I bit back the urge to point out that maybe if she spent less time partying and more time studying, she might find it easier. Instead, I just mumbled some vague encouragement and changed the subject. It was during my sophomore year that Sarah dropped her bombshell. I'm engaged, she squealed over the phone. Mike proposed last night. Isn't it romantic? Mike. Her high school sweetheart. The guy who'd once asked me if science was really hard and stuff. That's great, Sarah, I managed, trying to inject some enthusiasm into my voice. Have you set a date? We're thinking right after graduation, she gushed. Oh, Carla, it's going to be perfect. You'll be my maid of honor, won't you? The wedding was exactly as you'd expect. Sarah was radiant, Mike looked uncomfortable in his tux, and I stood there in my frilly pink nightmare, pasting on a smile for the photos. Isn't this perfect? Mom whispered to me during the reception. This is what every mother dreams of for her daughter. I wanted to ask if she'd ever dreamed anything for me, but I held my tongue. It was Sarah's day, after all. As I threw myself into my studies and later my career, Sarah's life seemed to follow a script straight out of our parents' dreams. Within a year of her wedding, she announced her first pregnancy. I'm going to be a grandmother. Mom squealed over the phone. Oh, Carla, isn't it wonderful? I murmured my congratulations, trying to ignore the implicit question in her voice. When are you going to settle down, Carla? When will you give us grandchildren? Emma arrived 9 months later, a bundle of pink blankets and loud cries. I flew home for the weekend, dutifully cooing over my new niece and enduring the not-so-subtle hints from my parents. You know, Carla, Dad said, bouncing Emma on his knee. You're not getting any younger. Don't you want this for yourself? I gritted my teeth. I'm focused on my career right now, Dad. Mom clucked her tongue. Career is all well and good, dear, but family is what really matters. I bit back a retort about how they'd never seemed to care much about my career before. Instead, I plastered on a smile and changed the subject. 2 years later, Liam joined the family. Once again, I played the role of the doting aunt, all while fielding questions about my own lack of family. Meanwhile, I was making strides in my career as a biotechnologist. Long hours and hard work paid off, and by 30, I was a senior researcher. My parents' response to this news? A distracted, "That's nice, dear," as they cooed over new pictures of Emma and Liam. It was around this time that I decided to buy a house. I'd saved carefully, living frugally while my colleagues splurged on expensive cars and vacations. When I finally found the perfect place, a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a great neighborhood, I was over the moon. Mom, Dad, I bought a house. I announced during our next phone call. There was a pause on the other end of the line. A house? Mom repeated. All by yourself? Yes, all by myself, I said, my excitement deflating a little. It's a great investment, but it's such a big house for one person, Mom interrupted. What will you do with all that space? I sighed. I'll enjoy it, Mom. It's mine. Well, she said, her tone making it clear she didn't approve, I suppose if that's what you want. Oh, did I tell you? Emma lost her first tooth yesterday. And just like that, we were back to talking about Sarah and her kids. The months following my house purchase were a whirlwind of work and settling into my new home. I threw myself into decorating, turning each room into a reflection of my personality. It was during this time that I started to feel a shift in my family dynamics. The usual calls from my parents became less frequent, and when they did call, there was an odd tension in their voices. One evening, I received a call from my mother. "Carla, dear," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "We're having a family dinner next week. You'll be there, won't you? We need to talk." I agreed, my suspicions raised. In my family, "we need to talk" usually meant trouble was brewing. The night of the dinner arrived, and I pulled up to my parents' house with a sense of foreboding. Sarah's car was already in the driveway, and I could hear the excited shrieks of Emma and Liam from inside. Dinner was a tense affair. My parents kept exchanging glances, and Sarah seemed unusually quiet. Mike, Sarah's husband, kept clearing his throat as if he wanted to say something, but thought better of it. Finally, as we were finishing dessert, my father cleared his throat. "Carla, we need to talk about something important." Here it comes, I thought. "What's up, Dad?" He glanced at my mother, who nodded encouragingly. "Well, you see, sweetie, we've been thinking. That big house of yours, it's really too much for just one person." I felt my hackles rise. "Dad, we've been over this. I like my house. It's mine." "Yes, but..." He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. My mother jumped in. "What your father is trying to say is that Sarah and her family need more space. The kids are growing, and their apartment is getting cramped." I looked at Sarah, who was suddenly very interested in her plate. "Okay, and?" "And we think," my mother continued, her voice sickly sweet, "that since you're single and have no children, you should give your house to Sarah and her family. Just give them the keys and move out." For a moment, I was speechless. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to yell, "Gotcha," and reveal it was all a joke. But all I saw were expectant faces. "You can't be serious," I finally managed. "Now, Carla," my mother said, her tone patronizing. "Don't be selfish. Sarah needs her own space more than you do." "Selfish?" I repeated, my voice rising. "How is it selfish to want to keep the house I worked hard for and paid for myself?" "It's your sisterly duty to help in times of need," my father chimed in. I turned to Sarah, who was still avoiding my gaze. "And what do you have to say about this?" She shrugged, finally meeting my eyes. "Well, it would be nice to have more space for the kids." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own family, asking me to give up my home, acting like I was the unreasonable one for refusing. "No," I said firmly, standing up. "Absolutely not. I'm not giving up my house." As I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, I heard my father call out, "Think about it, Carla. Family should come first." The days following that disastrous family dinner were a blur of disbelief and anger. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, unable to believe my family's audacity. How could they even think to ask such a thing? My phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls from my parents and Sarah, but I ignored them all. On the third day, as I was trying to focus on work, my phone lit up with a call from a number I didn't recognize. Figuring it wasn't family, I answered. "Hello, is this Carla?" A woman's voice came through, sounding disapproving. "Yes, who's this?" "This is your Aunt Mildred." "I can't believe what I'm hearing about you, young lady. Your poor sister needs a home for her children, and you're living all alone in that big house. Shame on you." I felt my blood pressure rising. "Aunt Mildred, that's not..." "In my day," she continued, not letting me get a word in, "family helped family. We didn't hoard our resources like misers." "I'm not hoarding anything," I snapped. "It's my house. I bought it with my own money." "Well," she huffed, "if you're not going to use all that space, you should at least consider donating your eggs. It's not like you're using them anyway." I was so shocked, I nearly dropped the phone. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she said primly. You're not getting any younger, you know. Tick-tock. I hung up without another word, my hands shaking with anger. How dare she? How dare any of them? But it didn't stop there. Over the next few days, I was bombarded with calls and messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Each one had an opinion on what I should do with my house and my life. My great-aunt Edna left a voicemail. Carla dear, it's your great-aunt Edna. I just wanted to say, it's not too late to find a nice man and settle down. Then you'd need that big house. It was relentless. Every ping of my phone brought a new judgment, a new guilt trip. I felt like I was going crazy. I started to dread checking my phone, wincing every time it buzzed. I threw myself into work, staying late at the lab just to avoid going home to more messages. It was during one of these late nights at work that I got sick. Nothing serious, just a bad cold, but enough that my boss insisted I take a few days off to recover. So there I was, curled up on my couch with a box of tissues, feeling miserable both physically and emotionally. My phone had been mercifully quiet for a few hours, and I was just starting to relax when I heard it. A noise at my front door. Like someone was fumbling with the lock. My heart started racing. Was someone trying to break in? I got up as quietly as I could, creeping towards the door. Through the window, I could see figures on my porch. Familiar figures. I yanked the door open, startling the people on the other side. What the hell are you doing? There, caught red-handed, were my parents and Sarah. They looked like deer caught in headlights, frozen in the act of trying to break into my home. My mother was the first to recover. Carla, dear, we were just worried about you. You haven't been answering your phone. So you decided to break into my house? I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. My father at least had the decency to look embarrassed. We didn't think you'd be home. We thought you'd be at work. And that makes it okay? I was practically shouting now. What were you planning to do? Move Sarah in while I was gone? Sarah, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Carla, you're being hysterical. We were just going to wait for you to come home. I noticed for the first time that there was a car parked behind them, loaded with boxes and furniture. My blood ran cold as I realized the full extent of their plan. You were going to move in, I said, my voice flat. You were actually going to move into my house without my permission. Now, Carla, my mother started, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I knew so well. We've discussed this. Sarah needs the space more than you do. We thought if we just took the initiative. You thought wrong, I cut her off. This is my house, mine. I bought it with my own money, money I earned through hard work. You have no right to it. Just then, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. My neighbors, the Johnsons, were peering out their window, clearly concerned by the commotion. Mr. Johnson caught my eye and held up his phone, mouthing, "Police?" I nodded, grateful for their concern. Turning back to my family, I said, "I've called the police. You need to leave. Now." "You wouldn't," my father scoffed. "Your own family?" As if on cue, the sound of sirens filled the air. My family's faces paled. The police car pulled up, and 2 officers got out. "Is there a problem here?" one of them asked, eyeing the scene warily. I took a deep breath. "Yes, officer. These people were attempting to break into my home." "Carla," my mother gasped. "How could you?" The officers looked at my family. "Is this true?" My father started to stammer out an explanation, but the officer held up a hand. "Sir, attempting to enter a property without the owner's permission is a serious offense. I'm going to have to ask you all to leave immediately." As the officers escorted my family off my property, I stood in the doorway, shaking. I couldn't believe it had come to this. "You'll regret this, Carla," Sarah called over her shoulder as they were leaving. "You'll end up old and alone." I slammed the door shut, sliding down to sit on the floor, my back against it. Tears started to flow freely now, a mix of anger, hurt, and relief. My phone had fallen silent. No more calls from distant relatives, no more guilt-tripping messages. It was as if I'd been excommunicated from the family. Part of me was relieved, but another part ached for the connection, dysfunctional as it had been. It was in this tumultuous state that I received an unexpected message. It was from my Aunt Maggie, my mother's sister. We hadn't spoken in years, not since she'd had a falling out with my mom over some old family drama. "I'll meet you tomorrow at Café Bleu at 1400 hours." Intrigued and desperate for any ally, I agreed to meet her. The next day, I found myself sitting across from Aunt Maggie in a cozy corner of Café Bleu. She looked older than I remembered, but her eyes were sharp and kind. "Carla," she began, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm so sorry for what you've been through. Your mother called me, trying to get me on her side. But there's more to this story than you know. That's why I asked you to meet me." My curiosity piqued, I leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Aunt Maggie took a deep breath. "Your parents and Sarah, they're in serious financial trouble. Sarah and Mike have been living beyond their means for years. Luxury cars, designer clothes, lavish vacations, all on credit." I shook my head in disbelief. "But why? How?" "It's worse than that," Aunt Maggie continued. "Mike has a gambling problem. A bad one. He's been secretly draining their accounts for years." The pieces started to fall into place. The desperate attempt to get my house, the constant pressure. "But what about Mom and Dad?" I asked. Aunt Maggie's face grew grim. "They lost a significant amount of money in a pyramid scheme a few years back. They've been barely keeping their heads above water. They were planning to move in with Sarah and Mike as soon as they got your house." I sat back, stunned. "How do you know all this?" "I work at the bank where they all have accounts," Aunt Maggie explained. "I noticed some suspicious activity and started digging. When I confronted your mother about it, she cut me out of the family." My mind was reeling. All this time, while I'd been working hard and saving, my family had been digging themselves into a hole. And they'd tried to drag me down with them. "Carla," Aunt Maggie said gently, "I know this is a lot to take in. But I think it's time we did something about this situation. If you're willing, I have an idea." Armed with the information Aunt Maggie had shared, we decided to dig deeper. We hired a private investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Diana who came highly recommended. For weeks, we waited anxiously as Diana worked her magic. Finally, she called us in for a meeting. What she revealed left us speechless. Mike, Sarah's husband, had been leading a double life. He was involved in an affair with none other than my cousin Jenny, Uncle Bob's daughter. "He's been funneling money to her for months," Diana explained, showing U.S. bank statements and hotel receipts. "Expensive gifts, weekend getaways, you name it." "But where did he get the money?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. Diana's face grew grim. "From his gambling wins, and from your parents." Aunt Maggie and I exchanged shocked glances. The betrayal ran deeper than we'd imagined. We decided to host a family gathering at my house. The irony wasn't lost on me, the very house they had tried to take from me would be the stage for their undoing. The day of the gathering arrived. I watched as my family members trickled in, their faces a mix of curiosity and smugness. They probably thought I was going to cave to their demands. Once everyone was seated, I stood up, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. "I've called you all here today because there are some things you need to know," I began. I laid out everything, the financial troubles, the gambling, the affair. With each revelation, I watched the color drain from their faces. Sarah jumped up, tears streaming down her face. "It's not true," she screamed, before collapsing into sobs. "Mike, tell them it's not true." But Mike was already halfway to the door. Uncle Bob, his face contorted with rage, caught him by the collar. "You son of," he growled. "That's my daughter you've been fooling around with." My parents sat in stunned silence, the reality of their exposed financial ruin seemingly more devastating than the fact that they had tried to steal my house. The relatives who had judged me so harshly began to stammer out apologies. "We had no idea," Aunt Mildred muttered. "Carla, we're so sorry." As the chaos unfolded around me, I felt a strange sense of calm. The truth was out. The lies and manipulations were exposed. In the weeks that followed, our family was turned upside down. Sarah, unable to forgive Mike's infidelity, filed for divorce. With nowhere else to go, she and the kids moved back in with our parents. But their reprieve was short-lived. The bank foreclosed on their house. They were forced to downsize to a small, rented apartment, all 5 of them crammed into a space smaller than my living room. As for me, I watched it all unfold from a distance. After much soul-searching and several tearful nights, I made the difficult decision to sever all ties with my immediate family. "You're doing the right thing, Carla," Aunt Maggie assured me one afternoon over coffee. "It's not easy, but it's necessary for your mental health and well-being." Aunt Maggie had become my rock, the family I chose when my blood relatives had let me down. Our weekly coffee dates became a cornerstone of my new life. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself settling into a new routine. Without the constant drama and demands of my family, I had time to focus on myself. But with that came a startling realization: I was lonely. "You know," Aunt Maggie said one day, "there's a world out there beyond work and home. Why don't you try something new?" With her encouragement, I decided to join a local rock climbing group. It was far outside my comfort zone, but as I strapped on the harness for the first time, I felt a thrill of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. That's where I met Alex. He was belaying another climber, his strong hands confidently handling the rope. When he turned and flashed me a warm smile, I felt my heart skip a beat. "First time?" he asked, noticing my nervous fidgeting with the equipment. "Is it that obvious?" I laughed. We struck up a conversation, and I was immediately drawn to his kind eyes and easygoing nature. As we talked, I learned he was a wildlife photographer, with a passion for capturing the beauty of nature. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of excitement about the possibility of a relationship. Alex was kind, adventurous, and understood the complexities of family dynamics in a way few others could. We began dating, our shared love for nature and understanding of complex family dynamics bringing us closer. Before I knew it, we were discussing marriage, a concept that once seemed foreign and unattainable to me. Through it all, Aunt Maggie remained my steadfast support. She became the mother figure I had always yearned for, but never had. "Carla," she said to me one day, her eyes misty, "I want you to know something. I've changed my will. I'm leaving everything to you." As I hugged her, tears streaming down my face, I marveled at how much my life had changed. The path hadn't been easy, but it had led me to where I was meant to be. With Aunt Maggie's love, Alex's support, and my newfound strength, I was ready to embrace whatever the future held. I'm Tiffany, and 10 years ago, I was a bright-eyed tour guide with dreams of exploring the world. That all changed when I met Jack. Jack was charming, successful, and swept me off my feet. We married quickly, and I thought I had it all. Then came the job offer that would change everything. "Tiff, I've been offered a position with an amazing law firm," Jack said one night over dinner. "That's great, honey." "Where?" "It's in another city." "We'd have to move." My heart sank. I loved my job, but I loved Jack more. "What about my work?" Jack's face hardened. "Come on, Tiff. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You can find work anywhere." I hesitated, but his excitement was contagious. "You're right. We'll make it work." We moved to a big house in a new city. At first, it was exciting. But as the boxes were unpacked, so was a new version of Jack I'd never seen before. "The house is a mess," he snapped one day, looking around our half-unpacked living room. "I'm working on it," I said, gesturing to the boxes. "Work faster. I can't live like this." I was taken aback, but brushed it off. He was under stress from the new job, I told myself. Weeks passed, and I struggled to find work. Maybe I should look for a tour guide position here, I suggested one evening. Jack laughed. Don't be ridiculous. You need to focus on the house. It's still not up to par. But I want to work, Jack. I miss it. He stood up, towering over me. I'm the one working, Tiffany. Your job is here, making sure everything is perfect for me. Got it? I nodded, fighting back tears. This wasn't the man I married, but I was determined to make it work. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would last for years. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, I found myself trapped in a routine of endless housework and walking on eggshells. Jack's demands grew more unreasonable, and his temper shorter. One day, I suggested hiring a housekeeper to help with the workload. Jack's face turned red. Are you kidding me? You want to waste my hard-earned money on something you should be doing? This is your job, Tiffany. If you can't handle it, maybe you're not cut out to be my wife. His words stung, but I swallowed my pride. You're right, I'm sorry. I'll try harder. And try harder I did. I threw myself into being the perfect housewife, hoping it would bring back the man I fell in love with. But the more I did, the more Jack expected. As his career soared, our relationship plummeted. I watched from the sidelines as he became a celebrated lawyer, all while I faded into the background, a ghost in my own home. As the years passed, I became a master of social media management, running Jack's accounts from behind the scenes. It was ironic, I crafted the image of a successful, happy couple while living a lie. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Jack stormed in, slamming the door. Rough day? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Shut up and get my food ready, he snapped. I quickly plated the meal I'd spent hours preparing. Jack took one bite and spat it out. This is disgusting. Can't you do anything right? Before I could respond, he swept the plate off the table. It shattered on the floor, food splattering everywhere. Clean it up, he growled, standing over me as I knelt to pick up the broken pieces. Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't dare let them fall. This had become our new normal. The next day, determined to do better, I spent hours cooking Jack's favorite dish. As I set the table, I realized with horror that I'd forgotten the bread. Jack walked in, loosening his tie. Where's my food? Coming right up, I said, hurrying to serve the soup. He sat down, looked at the table, and exploded. Where's the bread? Are you really this incompetent? In one swift motion, he knocked the bowl off the table. Hot soup splashed across my leg, and I couldn't hold back a scream of pain. God, you're so stupid, Jack muttered, leaving me alone with the mess and my burning skin. As I cleaned, sobbing quietly, a thought hit me like a thunderbolt. How did I let it get this bad? When did I become this shell of a person? The next morning, I woke up with a resolve I hadn't felt in years. I couldn't live like this anymore. Jack, I said as he was about to leave for work, I can't do this anymore. I want a divorce. He turned slowly, a cruel smile spreading across his face. A divorce? You? He laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. Listen carefully, Tiffany. If you leave me, I'll destroy you. You'll have nothing, no money, no reputation, nothing. You'll end up on the streets with the other worthless people. My breath caught in my throat. I'd seen the homeless in our city, their desperate faces haunting me. Could that really be my fate? Face it, Jack continued, you're nothing without me. Remember that. As he left, slamming the door behind him, I sank to the floor. He was right, I had no money of my own, no career, nothing. But I also knew I couldn't keep living like this. That day marked a turning point. I might not have had the courage to leave yet, but I started planning. I began secretly recording our interactions, saving abusive texts, and documenting everything. If I was going to escape, I needed proof. As I continued to document Jack's abuse, his career reached new heights. He won a high-profile case, and decided to celebrate at home with colleagues and friends. You'll prepare everything, he ordered. And don't even think about ordering in. I want it all homemade. For days, I worked tirelessly. I cleaned every inch of our house, prepared an array of dishes, and made sure everything was perfect. The night of the party arrived, and I was exhausted but ready. Jack came home early, carrying a bottle of wine. "Here," he said, pouring me a glass. "You look like you could use this." I was surprised by his gesture, but accepted gratefully. The wine tasted odd, but I chalked it up to my fatigue. Jack barely touched his glass. "Go change," he said. "Guests will be here soon." I headed upstairs, suddenly feeling dizzy. By the time I reached our bedroom, the room was spinning. I collapsed onto the bed, consciousness fading fast. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through the windows. Confused and groggy, I made my way downstairs. Jack's mother, Margaret, was in the kitchen. Her face contorted with disgust when she saw me. "Well, look who finally decided to grace us with her presence," she sneered. "You should be ashamed of yourself." What happened?" I asked, my head pounding. "What happened? You got drunk and embarrassed my son in front of all his colleagues, that's what happened." Margaret's voice rose with each word. "He had to call me to help entertain because his wife was passed out drunk upstairs." I felt sick. "No, that's not possible. I only had one glass of wine." "Oh, save it," Margaret cut me off. "I always knew you weren't good enough for my Jack. Now everyone knows what a mess you are." As Margaret continued her tirade, fragments of memory surfaced. The strange taste of the wine. Jack barely drinking his. The sudden onset of dizziness. "He drugged me," I whispered to myself, the realization hitting me like a truck. After Margaret left, I sat at the kitchen table, my mind racing. Jack was systematically destroying my reputation. If I tried to leave now, who would believe me? That day, I stepped up my efforts. I bought a new phone and hid it carefully. I started recording everything, Jack's drunken rants, his 3 a.m. cleaning demands, every insult and threat. One incident I recorded stood out painfully in my memory. It was my birthday, and I had hoped Jack might remember, might show a glimmer of the man I once loved. I prepared a special dinner, holding on to a foolish hope for a peaceful evening. Jack stumbled in late, reeking of alcohol. I hit record on my hidden phone as he entered the kitchen. "What's all this?" he slurred, eyeing the carefully set table. It's my birthday, Jack." "I made dinner," I said softly. He laughed, a cruel, harsh sound. "Your birthday? Who cares? Look at you, you fat cow. You don't deserve a celebration." I felt each word like a physical blow, but kept the camera rolling as he continued his tirade. "And this?" he gestured at the food. "This is slop. You call yourself a wife? Can't even cook a decent meal." He swept the plates off the table, food splattering across the floor I'd scrubbed meticulously earlier. I flinched but didn't move, letting the camera capture every moment of his drunken cruelty. Another night, the recording caught an even more bizarre incident. It was 3 a.m. when Jack shook me awake roughly. "Get up," he hissed, pulling me out of bed. "What's wrong?" I asked, disoriented and frightened. "I found dust. The house is filthy. Clean it. All of it. Now." For hours, I scrubbed every surface of our home, Jack following behind, inspecting my work with a critical eye. All the while, my phone recorded from its hidden spot, capturing his relentless demands and my exhausted compliance. These recordings became my secret weapons, concrete evidence of the abuse I endured. Each file was carefully saved and backed up, a digital archive of my suffering and, ultimately, my path to freedom. Meanwhile, I heard the whispers when we were out. Saw the looks of contempt from Jack's friends. But I kept smiling, playing the role of the perfect wife while secretly fighting for my freedom. Our wedding anniversary was approaching. Despite everything, a small part of me hoped things might improve. But I should have known better. The night of our anniversary, Jack came home in high spirits. I booked us a table at the best restaurant in town, he announced. Let's celebrate. I was wary but agreed. Before we left, Jack handed me a glass of lemonade. I made it myself, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Alarm bells rang in my head. I pretended to drink, but when Jack stepped out to make a call, I quickly poured it into a nearby plant. As we drove to the restaurant, I felt myself getting drowsy. I fought to stay awake, but my eyes were so heavy. The next thing I knew, I was being roughly pulled from the car. Through half-closed eyes, I saw Jack sneering down at me. "This is where you belong," he spat, throwing my purse far into the darkness. "With the other worthless people." I heard the car door slam, tires screeching as Jack sped away. My heart raced as I took in my surroundings. Trash littered the streets, and shadowy figures lurked in the darkness. The sound of distant gunshots made me flinch. I was alone, dressed up and wearing jewelry, in the most dangerous part of town. Jack's plan was clear. He hoped I'd fall victim to the criminals who called this area home. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced myself to think. I spotted a small convenience store, its flickering neon sign a beacon of hope in this desolate place. I ran towards it, my heels clacking on the cracked pavement. Bursting through the door, I startled the woman behind the counter. "Please," I gasped, "I need help. Can I use your phone?" The woman, her name tag read Rosa, looked at me with a mix of concern and suspicion. "What happened to you, honey?" In a rush, I explained my situation. Rosa's eyes widened, and without a word, she locked the store's front door. "Can't have any troublemakers coming in," she explained, handing me her cell phone. "Make your call, sweetie. You're safe here." With shaking hands, I dialed my friend Sarah's number, silently thanking my good memory. Sarah answered on the third ring. "Sarah, it's Tiffany. I need help," I said, my voice breaking. "Tiff? What's wrong? Where are you?" I gave her the store's address, and she gasped. "That's the worst neighborhood in the city." "What are you doing there?" "Jack, he left me here." "Please, can you come get me?" "I'm on my way. Don't move." As I waited, Rosa kept me company, her kindness a stark contrast to the cruelty I'd become accustomed to. "Thank you," I said as Sarah's car pulled up outside. "You may have saved my life tonight." I slipped off the expensive ring Jack had given me years ago. "Here, please take this." "It's not much, but..." Rosa shook her head. "Keep it, honey. Use it to start your new life." Tears in my eyes, I hugged her before rushing out to Sarah's car. As we drove away, Sarah turned to me. "Tiff, this has to stop. You need to fight back." "How?" I asked, feeling defeated. "He has all the power, all the connections." "Not all of them," Sarah said firmly. "I have a friend who works in television. It's time to tell your story." The next few days were a whirlwind. Sarah's friend, a producer named Lisa, arranged for me to appear on a popular talk show. The lights were blinding as I walked onto the set. The host, a kind-faced woman named Angela, greeted me warmly. "Tiffany, thank you for being here," she said. "Can you tell us your story?" Taking a deep breath, I began to speak. I told them everything, the years of emotional abuse, the manipulation, the incident in the bad neighborhood. As I spoke, I saw the shock and sympathy on the audience's faces. "Why are you coming forward now?" Angela asked. "Because I can't be silent anymore," I replied, my voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "There are so many women out there suffering in silence, thinking they're alone. I want them to know they're not." As the show ended, my phone exploded with notifications. My story had struck a chord, and people were rallying behind me. But amidst the supportive messages, one text made my blood run cold. It was from Jack. "You'll regret this, you lying scum. I'll destroy you." I showed the message to Sarah, my hands shaking. "Don't worry," she said, a determined glint in her eye. "He just made his biggest mistake. We've got him now." As we left the studio, I realized this was just the beginning. The real battle was about to start, and for the first time in years, I felt ready to fight. The days following my TV appearance were a blur of activity. My phone rang constantly with calls from journalists, lawyers, and women's rights advocates. Jack's threats continued, but each one only strengthened my resolve. One morning, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Tiffany?" a woman's voice asked when I answered. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Amanda Reeves. I'm a lawyer, and I'd like to help you with your case." I hesitated. "I appreciate the offer, but I can't afford a lawyer." "You misunderstand," Amanda said. "My firm wants to take your case pro bono. We've been looking for a way to take down Jack Peterson for years. Your story could be the key." It turned out that Jack had made many enemies over the years. Amanda's firm represented several clients who had lost cases to him, some under suspicious circumstances. They saw my case as an opportunity to not only help me, but to expose Jack's unethical practices. I met with Amanda and her team the next day. As I shared my evidence, the recordings, the text messages, everything, their eyes widened. "This is gold," Amanda said, reviewing the files. "With this, we can not only win your divorce case, but potentially get Jack disbarred." The divorce proceedings began, and Jack came out swinging. He painted a picture of me as an alcoholic, unfaithful wife who was trying to ruin his reputation out of spite. "Your Honor," Jack's lawyer argued, "Mrs. Peterson has a history of erratic behavior and substance abuse. These allegations are nothing more than the desperate actions of a woman trying to extort money from her hardworking husband." I watched as Jack's mother, Margaret, took the stand, tearfully recounting instances of my supposed drunken behavior, including the night of Jack's work party. "She was a disgrace," Margaret sobbed. "My poor son has suffered so much because of her." I felt sick listening to their lies, but Amanda squeezed my hand reassuringly. "Don't worry," she whispered. "We're just getting started." When it was our turn to present evidence, Amanda was ruthless. She played the recordings of Jack's abuse, showed the threatening text messages, and presented a timeline of his escalating behavior. "And now," Amanda said, "I'd like to call Sarah Thompson to the stand." Sarah recounted the night she picked me up from the dangerous neighborhood, her testimony corroborating my story. "Objection," Jack's lawyer shouted. "This is hearsay." "Overruled," the judge said. "Continue, Ms. Thompson." Next, Amanda called Rosa, the convenience store clerk, to testify. Rosa described my state when I entered her store that night, and how she had to lock the door for my safety. Jack's face grew redder with each testimony. I could see him seething, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. The final blow came when Amanda presented a toxicology report. "Your Honor, we had Mrs. Peterson's hair tested for long-term drug exposure. The results show traces of sedatives, consistent with her account of being drugged by Mr. Peterson." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Jack leapt to his feet, shouting, "She's lying. You can't believe this." "Mr. Peterson, control yourself or I'll hold you in contempt," the judge warned. As the evidence mounted, I saw the change in people's faces. The doubt was replaced by shock and sympathy. Even some of Jack's friends in the gallery looked disgusted. The judge called a recess to review all the evidence. As we filed out of the courtroom, I caught Jack's eye. For the first time, I saw fear there. The courtroom was packed as we reconvened for the judge's decision. The tension was palpable, and I could feel Jack's glare burning into the back of my head. Judge Harris cleared his throat. "After careful consideration of all evidence presented, this court finds in favor of Mrs. Tiffany Peterson." A collective gasp filled the room. I sat there, stunned, as the judge continued. "Mr. Jack Peterson is hereby ordered to pay alimony, surrender 50% of all joint property, and provide financial compensation for emotional damages. Furthermore, Mr. Peterson will cover all legal costs associated with this case." Jack exploded. "This is outrageous. I'll appeal. You can't do this to me." "Mr. Peterson," the judge's voice boomed, "I suggest you control yourself. Given the evidence presented, you should consider yourself lucky that criminal charges haven't been filed." As Jack was forcibly calmed by his lawyer, the judge turned to me. "Mrs. Peterson, this court is imposing a restraining order against Mr. Peterson. He is not to approach you or contact you through any means. Do you understand?" I nodded, tears of relief streaming down my face. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I moved out of the house I had once considered a prison, into a small but cozy apartment. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. But Jack wasn't done. Despite the restraining order, he found ways to make his presence felt. Mutual acquaintances would relay his threats, and I'd occasionally spot his car driving by my new place. "We need to do something," Sarah said one evening as we were having coffee. "He's not going to stop." I nodded, an idea forming. "You're right. And I think I know how to end this once and for all." I still had access to Jack's social media accounts. He'd been too arrogant to change the passwords, probably assuming I wouldn't dare touch them. It was time to use that against him. Over the next few days, I meticulously documented our entire divorce process on his accounts. I shared court transcripts, audio clips, and my own story. The response was overwhelming. Jack's carefully crafted public image crumbled overnight. His firm, unwilling to be associated with the scandal, asked for his resignation. Clients dropped him in droves. When Jack realized what was happening, he went ballistic. He showed up at my apartment, pounding on the door. "You scum," he screamed. "I'll kill you for this." I called the police, and they arrived quickly. Jack was arrested for violating the restraining order, his threats caught on my phone's voice recorder. As they led him away, I saw the man I had once loved, now a shell of himself, broken by his own cruelty and arrogance. In the following months, I heard through the grapevine that Jack had moved to another state, trying to rebuild his career. But his reputation followed him, and he struggled to find work. As for me, I was rebuilding too, but in a much different way. The publicity from the case led to an opportunity one never expected. A local charity that helped women escape abusive relationships reached out to me. "We'd like you to come work with us," the director said. "Your experience could help so many women." I accepted without hesitation. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a purpose. I was using my pain to help others, and in doing so, I was healing myself. 1 year after the trial, I stood in front of a room full of women, all survivors like me. As I shared my story, I saw hope rekindling in their eyes. "Remember," I told them, "you are stronger than you know. Your story matters. And you are not alone." As I looked out at their faces, I realized that this moment, this purpose, was what I had been fighting for all along. Not just my freedom, but the chance to help others find theirs. As months passed, my work at the charity became more than just a job, it became my calling. I found myself connecting with women from all walks of life, each with their own harrowing stories of abuse and survival. One day, a young woman named Emily came to our center. Her story was painfully familiar: a controlling husband, isolation from friends and family, and a deep-seated fear of leaving. Over the next few weeks, I worked closely with Emily, helping her create a safety plan and build up her confidence. When she finally left her husband, the look of relief on her face was all too familiar. "Thank you," she whispered, hugging me tightly. "You saved my life." Her words hit me hard. In helping her, I realized I was also continuing to heal myself. As our center's reputation grew, we started receiving invitations to speak at conferences and events. At first, the idea terrified me. Public speaking had never been my forte, and the thought of sharing my story with large audiences made my palms sweat. But Sarah, ever my rock, encouraged me. "Tiff, your story could help so many people. You've got to do this." My first speaking engagement was at a local university. As I stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, I felt a surge of strength I didn't know I possessed. "My name is Tiffany," I began, and this is my story of survival. As I spoke, I saw the impact my words were having. Students leaned forward in their seats, some wiping away tears, others nodding in understanding or clenching their fists in anger at what I'd endured. After the talk, a line of people formed to speak with me. Many shared their own experiences or those of loved ones. Others simply wanted to offer support. That night, as I lay in bed reflecting on the day, I felt a profound sense of purpose. My past, painful as it was, had become a tool for change. The speaking engagements continued, taking me across the country. I spoke at universities, women's shelters, and even a TEDx event. Each time, I drew strength from the audience, from the knowledge that my words might be the lifeline someone needed. During this time, I also started writing a book about my experiences. It was a grueling process, forcing me to relive some of my darkest moments. But it was also cathartic, allowing me to process my trauma in a new way. The day my book was published was surreal. Seeing my name on the cover, my story laid bare for the world to read, filled me with a mix of terror and pride. To my amazement, the book resonated with people. It climbed the bestseller lists, and I soon found myself doing interviews on national television. During one such interview, the host asked me a question that made me pause. "Tiffany, after everything you've been through, do you have any regrets?" I thought for a moment before answering. I regret the years I lost to fear and abuse. But I don't regret my journey. Every step, every struggle, led me to where I am now, able to help others find their strength. So no, I wouldn't change a thing. As I continued my work, I realized that my story was far from over. Each day brought new challenges, new opportunities to grow and to help others. The scared, silenced woman I once was had become a voice for the voiceless, a beacon of hope for those still trapped in the darkness I had escaped. My name's Caroline, and I've been married to Mike for 5 years now. I work as a chef at a local restaurant, and I absolutely love it. Cooking's been my passion since I was a kid, and I've always dreamed of becoming a famous chef someday. Mike works as a sales manager for a small company. Our life together was pretty good, for the most part. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but we managed to make it work. The only real thorn in my side was Mike's mother, Linda. She's a social worker, specializing in child safety assessments for the local administration. And let me tell you, she's a piece of work. From day one, Linda made it clear she didn't like me. Nothing I did was ever good enough for her. She'd always find something to criticize, whether it was my cooking, my appearance, or just the way I breathed. It was exhausting. The worst part was that Mike never stood up for me. He'd just sit there, silent, while his mother tore me apart. One day, I decided to confront Mike about his relationship with his mother. We were sitting in our living room after dinner, the TV droning on in the background. "Mike," I started, trying to keep my voice calm, "don't you think your mom's a bit harsh sometimes?" Mike's face hardened. "Look, Caroline, you don't understand. Mom's always been like this. She raised me and my brother on her own after Dad left. She had to be tough. But..." He cut me off. "She used to tell us that if we misbehaved, she'd give us away to other parents. It scared the hell out of us, but it worked. We learned to behave." I stared at him, shocked. That's terrible, Mike. You know that's not normal, right?" He shrugged. "It's just how things were. Mom did her best." I realized then that this was a battle I couldn't win. Mike was too deeply under his mother's influence. Years of manipulation and fear had left their mark. As if dealing with Linda wasn't bad enough, there was also the constant comparison to Sarah, my sister-in-law. Sarah was married to Mike's older brother, Tom. In Linda's eyes, Sarah could do no wrong. She was the perfect daughter-in-law, smart, talented, beautiful, and well-mannered. Everything I apparently wasn't. "Oh, Caroline," Linda would say during our family dinners, "did you hear about Sarah's latest achievement at work? She got another promotion. Isn't that wonderful?" I'd nod and smile, my jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. "That's great, Sarah. Congratulations." Sarah would beam, basking in the praise. "Thank you, Caroline. It's not much, really." But the worst part of these dinners wasn't the comparisons. It was the constant badgering about children. Linda was obsessed with the idea of grandchildren, and she made it her mission to remind me of my duty at every opportunity. "So, Caroline," she'd start, her eyes narrowing, "when are you and Mike planning on starting a family? You're not getting any younger, you know." I'd take a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "We're focusing on our careers right now, Linda. Children will come when we're ready." Linda would scoff. "Career? Cooking isn't a career, dear. It's a hobby. A real woman knows her place is in the home, raising children." I'd feel my blood boil, but I'd bite my tongue. Getting into an argument wouldn't change anything. Mike, as usual, would stay silent, pushing food around his plate. Interestingly, Linda never bothered Sarah about having children. I found out why one day when Mike let it slip that Tom was infertile. It was a family secret, one that Linda guarded fiercely. She'd rather have no grandchildren than admit her precious firstborn had any flaws. Over time, Linda tightened her grip on her sons, insisting they help her with everything. And of course, that expectation extended to the daughters-in-law as well. Tom and Sarah lived nearby, so it was easier for them to cater to Linda's whims. But Mike and I lived further away and both worked late hours. We couldn't visit as often as Linda wanted, and boy, did she let us know how unhappy she was about it. "I might as well be dead for all you two care," she'd say dramatically over the phone. My own son and his wife, too busy to visit their poor, widowed mother. I'd roll my eyes, mouthing the words along with her. I'd heard this speech so many times I could recite it in my sleep. "We're sorry, Linda," I'd say, not feeling sorry at all. "We'll try to visit more often." But it was never enough. In Linda's world, we should be at her beck and call, 24/7. And of course, it was all my fault. I was the one bossing Mike around and keeping him from his familial duties. As the months went by, I threw myself into my work even more. The kitchen became my sanctuary, the only place where I felt truly valued and respected. Chef Paolo continued to mentor me, pushing me to expand my skills and creativity. "You have a gift, Caroline," he'd say, tasting my latest creation. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." His words were a balm to my battered self-esteem. In the kitchen, I wasn't the disappointing daughter-in-law or the wife who couldn't give her husband children. I was just Caroline, the talented chef with a bright future ahead of her. The day everything started to unravel began like any other. I was at work, up to my elbows in prep for the dinner rush, when my phone buzzed. It was Linda. I groaned internally, but answered anyway. "Hello, Linda. What can I do for you?" Her voice came through, sharp and demanding. "Caroline, I need you to come to the mall and pick me up. Sarah and I have been shopping, and we have too many bags for a taxi." I glanced at the clock. It was peak traffic time, and the mall was on the other side of town. "Linda, I'm at work. I can't just leave." "Oh, so your job is more important than family?" she interrupted. "I see how it is. I suppose I'll just have to struggle with all these bags myself. At my age, I could throw my back out, but don't you worry about that." I closed my eyes, counting to 10 in my head. "Fine, Linda. I'll be there as soon as I can." The traffic was a nightmare. I sat in gridlock for over an hour, my frustration mounting with each passing minute. By the time I finally reached the mall, I was a ball of stress and irritation. I circled the parking lot, looking for Linda and Sarah. They were nowhere to be seen. I called Linda's phone. No answer. I tried Sarah. Nothing. Finally, after my third attempt, Linda picked up. "Where are you?" I asked, trying to keep the annoyance out of my voice. "Oh, Caroline," Linda said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. We got tired of waiting, so we took a taxi home. I thought Sarah texted you. Before I could protest, she hung up. I sat there, staring at my phone in disbelief. Then I screamed. I screamed until my throat was raw, letting out all the frustration and anger I'd been bottling up for years. When I got home, Mike was already there. I stormed in, still seething from the day's events. "Your mother," I started, but Mike cut me off. I know. Mom told me what happened." "Why didn't you get there faster?" "She had to take a taxi, because of you." I stared at him, mouth agape. "Are you kidding me right now? I left work early, sat in traffic for hours, and it's my fault?" Mike shrugged. "You know how Mom is with waiting. You should have planned better." The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and tense silences at home. Mike and I were barely speaking, the rift between us growing wider with each passing day. Then, one evening as I was closing up the kitchen, my phone rang. It was Linda again. I considered ignoring it, but I knew that would only lead to more drama. With a heavy sigh, I answered. "Hello, Linda." "Caroline, dear," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "I need you to do me a favor. It's Sarah's birthday tomorrow. I'm throwing her a little party at my house. I need you to deliver food from your restaurant. The most expensive dishes, mind you. For 10 people. I felt my blood pressure rising. "Linda, that's going to be extremely expensive. I can't just—" "Oh, don't be so stingy," she interrupted. "It's for family. And of course, you'll be paying for it. Consider it your gift to Sarah." I nearly dropped the phone. "You want me to pay for a gourmet meal for 10 people? Linda, that's insane. I can't afford that." She sked disapprovingly. "Well, if you're going to be difficult about it, I suppose you could always cook the meal yourself and bring it over. That's what a real chef would do, isn't it?" I closed my eyes, counting to 10 in my head. "Linda, I work full-time. I don't have the energy to cook a gourmet meal for 10 people after a full shift." "I see," she said, her voice cold. "Well, I'll let Mike know how little you care about his family. Goodbye, Caroline." The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, feeling a mixture of rage and disbelief. When I got home, Mike was waiting for me, his face like a thundercloud. "Mom called," he said without preamble. "Why are you being so difficult about Sarah's birthday? Mom's right, you don't care about anyone but yourself." In the end, I caved. I couldn't face another argument, another night of cold silence. The next day, I placed the order at the restaurant, wincing as I handed over my credit card. It was a huge chunk of my savings, but what choice did I have? The following evening, Mike and I arrived at Linda's house for the party. I was exhausted from a long day at work, but I plastered on a smile as we entered. Linda greeted us at the door, all smiles for Mike and barely a glance for me. "Oh, you're here. Come in, come in. Everyone's already started eating." We walked into the dining room, and I stopped short. The table was laden with food, but it wasn't the dishes I had ordered from the restaurant. Instead, there was an array of homemade dishes that looked, well, less than appetizing. "What's going on?" I asked, confused. "Where's the food from the restaurant?" Sarah looked up from her plate, smirking. "Oh, didn't Mom tell you? I decided I wanted to cook for my own birthday. Isn't that right, Mom?" Linda nodded, beaming at Sarah. "Yes, and everything is just delicious. Sarah's such a talented cook." I stood there, speechless. Mike nudged me. "Come on, let's sit down. Don't make a scene." Numbly, I took my seat. Mike chatted and laughed with everyone, seemingly oblivious to my discomfort. I caught Linda watching me several times, a satisfied smirk on her face. By the time we left, I was emotionally drained. In the car on the way home, I turned to Mike. "Did you know about this? That Sarah was going to cook?" He shrugged. "Mom might have mentioned it. What's the big deal?" I stared at him in disbelief. The big deal is that I spent a fortune on food that's now going to waste, Mike. And your mother knew that when she asked me to order it. You're overreacting, he said, not taking his eyes off the road. It was just a misunderstanding. But I knew better. This was no misunderstanding. It was a calculated move by Linda, another in her endless series of power plays. And once again, I was the loser. A couple of months passed, and the tension in our household had become almost unbearable. Mike and I were barely speaking, and when we did, it usually ended in an argument. I was spending more and more time at the restaurant, throwing myself into my work with a kind of desperate energy. One evening, as I was cleaning up after a long shift, Mike approached me with an unusually excited expression on his face. "Caroline," he said, his eyes bright, "I need your help with something important." I raised an eyebrow, curious despite myself. "What is it?" "It's Mom's birthday next month," he explained, "and I want to do something really special for her. Something that'll blow Tom's gift out of the water. Got any ideas?" I was about to shake my head when suddenly, a thought struck me. I remembered overhearing Chef Paolo talking about an upcoming event at the restaurant. "Actually," I said slowly, "I might have an idea. On your mom's birthday, there's going to be a special event at the restaurant. They're filming an episode of that cooking show your mom loves. You know, the one with that presenter she's always going on about?" Mike's eyes widened. "No way. Are you serious?" I nodded, feeling a small spark of excitement despite myself. "Yeah, we could book a table for that night. If we're lucky, we might even get to be part of the filming. It's happening in the next room over from the main dining area." Mike's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "Caroline, that's perfect. Mom would absolutely love that. She's always wanted to meet that presenter." For a moment, I felt a warm glow of satisfaction. It was nice to see Mike so happy, and for once, to be the source of that happiness. "We should keep it a surprise," I suggested, getting caught up in the moment. "Can you imagine her face when she realizes where she is and what's happening?" Mike nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. We'll keep it completely under wraps. She won't suspect a thing." We spent the next hour planning out the details. I would book the table and arrange everything at the restaurant. Mike would handle getting Linda there without spoiling the surprise. The next day, I spoke to Chef Paolo about booking the table and explained the situation. He was more than happy to help, even offering to put us at one of the best tables in the house. The day of Linda's birthday arrived, and I woke up feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. As I was getting ready, Mike approached me with an odd expression on his face. "Hey, I think I'll go pick up Mom myself," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Why don't you head to the restaurant on your own?" "I'll meet you there with Mom." I frowned, a little taken aback. "Oh, okay. What time should I arrive?" "Just stick to the reservation time," Mike said quickly. "I'll handle everything else." I noticed Mike leaving much earlier than necessary, but I brushed it off. Maybe he had some last-minute preparations to take care of. When I arrived at the restaurant at the appointed time, my heart sank. Through the window, I could see that the dining room was already full. Our family and several guests were seated at the largest table, laughing and talking animatedly. They looked like they'd been there for quite some time. I entered, my steps faltering as I approached the table. My usual place next to Mike was occupied by one of Linda's friends. I stood there, feeling like a ghost at my own party. "Hello, everyone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. They barely glanced at me, continuing their conversations as if I weren't there. The only one who acknowledged me was Linda, who gave me a smug smile before turning back to her guests. I turned to Mike, confusion and hurt swirling inside me. "What's going on?" "I thought we were surprising your mother together." Mike finally looked at me, his expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. "Caroline, we're tired of all the drama. Mom's birthday should be a happy occasion, without any arguments or tension. We thought it would be better this way." I felt like I'd been slapped. better? You mean, better without me? Before Mike could respond, Linda chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Oh, Caroline, dear. Didn't Mike tell you? We decided to have a little family gathering. Just the people who really matter. I felt my face burning with humiliation. That's when I noticed the camera crew in the corner, filming the whole scene. Linda, oblivious to their presence, continued her tirade. You know, it's probably for the best that you haven't given Mike any children, she said loudly. A barren, useless woman like you shouldn't be a mother. If you ever do manage to have a child, I'll make sure it's taken away and given to Sarah. She'd be a much better mother. Sarah, Mike's sister-in-law, giggled as Linda patted her head approvingly. Linda was on a roll now, playing to her audience. You should see some of the cases I deal with at work. Women like Caroline, thinking they can have it all, a career and a family. Huh. I take their children away and give them to real families, families with proper values. The guests nodded and murmured in agreement, shooting me mocking looks. I stood there, frozen, as Linda continued to spew her venom. I felt a deep sense of shame, not for myself, but for this woman who could be so cruel, so callous. I'm not hungry, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Enjoy your dinner. As I turned to leave, I heard Linda's laughter, followed by the laughter of her guests. The sound followed me out of the restaurant, echoing in my ears like a twisted symphony. I arrived home, my mind still reeling from the events at the restaurant. Without thinking, I started pulling clothes from the closet, stuffing them haphazardly into a suitcase. I couldn't stay here anymore, not after what had just happened. As I was frantically packing, my phone rang. It was James, the restaurant administrator. I almost didn't answer, but something in me made me pick up. Caroline, James's voice was urgent. You need to check the social media page for that cooking show that was filming at the restaurant today. Now. Curiosity overcame my desire to flee. I opened my laptop and found the page. What I saw made my jaw drop. There, front and center, was a video of Linda. But it wasn't the polished, put-together Linda she usually presented to the world. This was Linda in all her ugly glory, spewing venom about me, about how she abused her position to take children from their mothers. The video had hundreds of thousands of views already, and the comments section was on fire. She should be fired immediately. How can someone so cruel work with children? Poor Caroline, having to deal with such a monster of a mother-in-law. Before I knew what I was doing, I was in my car, driving back to the restaurant. I burst through the doors, my heart pounding. Linda was still there, chatting animatedly with the show's presenter. When she saw me, her face twisted with annoyance. "Why are you back?" she hissed. "Haven't you embarrassed yourself enough for one night?" Without a word, I thrust my phone in front of her face, the damning video playing on the screen. Linda's face drained of color as she watched herself, her own words, condemning her. What is this?" she sputtered. Then, turning to the presenter, she shrieked. "You! Take this down immediately. I'll sue you for everything you've got." The presenter just laughed. "I could take it down, sure. But it's already been shared thousands of times. You're viral, Linda. Congratulations on your newfound fame." Linda's face contorted with rage. She began grabbing plates off the table, hurling them to the floor. "I'll ruin you," she screamed. "I'll ruin all of you." "Oh, I wouldn't do that if I were you," the presenter said calmly. "We're still live, you see. Your little tantrum is being broadcast to the whole country right now." Linda froze, her face a mask of horror. The other guests at the table sat in stunned silence, looking as if they wanted the ground to open up and swallow them. James appeared at my side, his face grim. "I'm going to have to ask you all to leave," he said firmly. "Now. Or I'll be forced to call the police." As Linda and her entourage disappeared into the night, the presenter turned to me, a sympathetic smile on his face. "Caroline, isn't it?" he said. "Would you mind if we had a quick chat on camera? I think our viewers would love to hear your side of the story." I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. As the camera turned to me, I took a deep breath. This was my chance to tell my truth, to reclaim my narrative. The aftermath of Linda's public meltdown was swift and merciless. Within days, she was fired from her job in disgrace, her years of manipulating the system finally catching up with her. The influential position she'd wielded like a weapon was gone, along with the respect she'd commanded in society. As for me, I wasted no time. The very next day, I filed for divorce. Mike came to me, his eyes red and pleading, begging for forgiveness. "Caroline, please," he said, his voice breaking. "I made a terrible mistake. We can work this out, I promise. I'll stand up to Mom, I'll be better." I looked at him, feeling a mixture of pity and resolve. "It's too late, Mike. You had years to stand up for me, to be a real partner. But you chose your mother over me every single time." The divorce was surprisingly quick. We didn't have much to divide, and Mike, perhaps out of guilt, didn't contest anything. Just like that, 5 years of marriage were dissolved, reduced to nothing more than a signature on a piece of paper. But as one chapter of my life closed, another one opened up in ways I never could have imagined. Chef Paolo approached me a week after the incident. "Caroline," he said, a broad smile on his face, "I've got some news for you. The owner was impressed with how you handled everything. We want to make you the head chef of our restaurant in the city center." It wasn't just the promotion. TV shows started calling, wanting me as a guest. At first, they just wanted me to cook, but soon they were asking me to speak about my experiences, about self-respect and the importance of love in family relationships. I started a YouTube channel, sharing recipes and life advice. The comments section was filled with messages from people who had been through similar experiences, thanking me for giving them the courage to stand up for themselves. One day, my agent, yes, I had an agent now, called with exciting news. "Caroline, I've got multiple offers for you to host your own TV show on cable. Are you interested?" I couldn't believe it. Me, with my own TV show? It was beyond anything I'd ever dreamed of. As for my former family, well, I heard things through the grapevine. Linda's influence over her sons was waning. Sarah, my former sister-in-law, who had always been Linda's golden child, now openly despised her mother-in-law. Funny how quickly things change when the true nature of a person is revealed. Some people asked if I felt sorry for them, if I regretted how things had turned out. The truth is, I didn't. They had made their choices, just as I had made mine. The difference was, I could look myself in the mirror each morning and be proud of the person I saw. I'm Amanda Pierce, 32 years old, born and raised in Miami. My life revolves around gems and jewelry, just like my parents and grandparents did. Pierce Gems, our family's boutique jewelry store, sits pretty in Miami's fancy shopping district. It's not just a store, it's my whole world. Growing up, I spent more time in the workshop than I did in playgrounds. While other kids were learning to ride bikes, I was learning to cut stones. My dad would sit me on his lap, his big, calloused hands guiding my smaller ones as we worked on a piece together. "Remember, Mandy," he'd say, his voice gruff but kind, "it's not just about making something pretty. It's about creating something that tells a story. Our family has a secret. No, we're not secretly royalty or anything like that. It's a technique for processing gems that makes them shine like nothing you've ever seen. This secret's been passed down for 3 generations, and it's what makes Pierce Gems special. Guard this secret with your life, Amanda," my dad told me on my 21st birthday. It's not just our past, it's our future. And I did. I guarded it fiercely. It was my responsibility, my burden, and my ticket to success in a world that often didn't take a young woman seriously. Pierce Gems wasn't just successful, it was thriving. We had a loyal clientele who appreciated the unique brilliance of our pieces. Other jewelers tried to figure out our secret, but none came close. The Gemstone Society's annual gala was always a glitzy affair, but that year, it felt different. Maybe it was the champagne, or maybe it was the way my new emerald dress hugged my curves, but I felt electric that night. I made my way through the crowd, nodding at familiar faces and exchanging pleasantries. The room was a sea of designer gowns and tailored suits, everyone dripping in jewels that probably cost more than my first car. "Amanda, darling, you look fabulous," gushed Marjorie, one of our regular clients. She grabbed my hands, her eyes zeroing in on the ring I was wearing. "Is this one of your new pieces? It's stunning." I smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "Just finished it last week. It's part of our new Midnight Sky collection." "I simply must have one," Marjorie declared. "I'll stop by the shop next week." As she fluttered off to gossip with her friends, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around and found myself face to face with the most captivating pair of blue eyes I'd ever seen. "Excuse me," said the owner of those eyes, flashing a smile that could melt ice. I couldn't help but overhear. "You're Amanda Pierce, aren't you?" I nodded, suddenly feeling tongue-tied. "That's me. And you are?" "Jason Randfield," he replied, extending his hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you. I've heard great things about your work." Randfield. The name hit me like a ton of bricks. The Randfields were jewelry royalty, owners of one of the largest jewelry empires in the country. And here was their heir, talking to me like I was the most interesting person in the room. "The pleasure's all mine," I managed to say, shaking his hand. "I didn't realize the Randfields would be here tonight." Jason laughed, a rich, warm sound that made me feel like we were sharing an inside joke. "We usually skip these events, but I insisted on coming this year. I've been following your work, Amanda. You're making waves in the industry." I felt a blush creep up my cheeks. "That's very kind of you to say." "It's the truth," he said, his eyes twinkling. "In fact, I was hoping we could discuss a potential collaboration. How about dinner next week?" My heart skipped a beat. A collaboration with the Randfields could take Pierce Gems to the next level. But a small voice in the back of my head whispered a warning. The Randfields were our biggest competitors. Could they be trusted? I pushed the thought aside. This was business, nothing more. "Dinner sounds great," I heard myself say. Jason's smile widened. "Excellent. I'll have my assistant set it up." He glanced over my shoulder and frowned slightly. "I'm afraid I have to mingle, but I'm looking forward to our dinner, Amanda." As he walked away, I felt like I was floating. Jason Randfield had sought me out. Me, Amanda Pierce, the girl who spent more time with gems than people. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I danced, I laughed, I networked. But my mind kept drifting back to those blue eyes and that dazzling smile. Jason had chosen a trendy restaurant in South Beach, the kind of place where the who's who of Miami came to see and be seen. As I walked in, I spotted him immediately, looking impossibly handsome in a tailored suit. He stood up as I approached, his eyes lighting up. "Amanda," he said, taking my hand. "You look stunning." I felt a flutter in my stomach, but pushed it down. "Thank you, Jason. You clean up pretty well yourself." As we sipped our wine, the conversation flowed easily. We talked about our shared passion for jewelry, swapping stories about difficult clients and challenging designs. I found myself relaxing, drawn in by Jason's wit and charm. "So," I said, as our main courses arrived. "You mentioned a potential collaboration at the gala. What did you have in mind?" Jason leaned forward, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "I've been following your work for a while now, Amanda. The way you bring out the brilliance in gems, it's unlike anything I've seen before. I think a partnership between Pierce Gems and Randfield Jewelry could revolutionize the industry." I raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold statement. How exactly would this partnership work?" "We have the resources and the reach," Jason explained. "You have the skill and the innovation. Together, we could create a line that combines the best of both our worlds." It sounded tempting, I had to admit. But years of protecting our family secret made me cautious. And what about our individual techniques? Our trade secrets? Jason held up his hands. Those would remain separate, of course. This would be about combining our strengths, not revealing our secrets. I nodded slowly, turning the idea over in my mind. It's an interesting proposition. I'd need to think about it, discuss it with my team. Of course, Jason said, his smile understanding. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. As dinner progressed, our conversation drifted from business to more personal topics. Jason told me about growing up in the shadow of the Randfield Empire, the pressure to live up to his family name. I found myself opening up about my own experiences, the weight of carrying on the Pierce legacy. Before I knew it, we were seeing each other regularly. Jason swept me off my feet with grand gestures and intimate moments. One weekend, he surprised me with a spontaneous trip to the Bahamas. Pack a bag, he said, showing up at my door with a mischievous grin. We're going on an adventure. I hesitated, thinking about the orders I needed to fill. Jason, I can't just leave. I have work. He silenced me with a kiss. The work will be there when you get back. When's the last time you took a break, Amanda? I couldn't remember, and that realization made me pause. Maybe he was right. Maybe I did need a break. The Bahamas were like a dream. We spent our days lounging on pristine beaches, snorkeling in crystal clear waters, and our nights dancing under the stars. It was intoxicating, being the center of Jason's attention. Back in Miami, our relationship continued to blossom. Jason would surprise me with rare orchids flown in from Thailand, their delicate petals reminding me of his thoughtfulness. We'd spend evenings at fancy restaurants or quiet nights in, talking for hours about everything and nothing. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The first time Jason took me to meet his parents, I felt like I'd stepped into a lion's den. Vivian Randfield, Jason's mother, looked me up and down with barely concealed disdain. So, you're the little jeweler Jason's been spending so much time with, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I straightened my spine, meeting her gaze. That's right. Amanda Pierce, of Pierce Gems. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Randfield. Robert Randfield, Jason's father, was a bit warmer, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. Pierce Gems, he mused. You've been making quite a name for yourselves lately. Impressive for such a small operation. The dinner was a minefield of backhanded compliments and thinly veiled insults. At one point, Vivian accidentally spilled her red wine on my dress. Oh, I'm so sorry, she exclaimed, not sounding sorry at all. I suppose your hands must be too rough from all that manual labor to hold delicate glassware properly. I plastered on a smile even as I seethed inside. No worries, Mrs. Randfield. Accidents happen. Jason squeezed my hand under the table, a silent show of support. Later, as he drove me home, he apologized profusely. I'm so sorry about my parents, he said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. They can be difficult. I sighed, looking out at the Miami skyline. It's okay. I'm sure they're just protective of you. Jason shook his head. It's not okay. You're important to me, Amanda. They need to accept that. His words warmed my heart, pushing away the lingering chill from his parents' cold reception. As weeks turned into months, I found myself falling harder for Jason. He was everything I'd never known I wanted, charming, worldly, and seemingly head over heels for me. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen and appreciated for more than just my craft. We'd been dating for about 8 months when he surprised me with a trip to Paris. Pack your bags, darling, he said, his eyes twinkling with excitement. We're off to the city of love. And so I found myself in Paris, strolling hand in hand with Jason along the Seine, marveling at the architecture, and indulging in decadent French cuisine. It was like a dream. On our last night in Paris, Jason took me to dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant with a view of the Eiffel Tower. As we finished our dessert, he suddenly looked nervous. Amanda, he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. These past months have been the happiest of my life. I can't imagine my life without you. He stood up, and to my shock, got down on one knee beside our table. The other diners gasped and turned to watch. Amanda Pierce, Jason said, pulling out a small velvet box. Will you marry me? I stared at the ring in shock. It was beautiful, but a small part of me couldn't help but notice that it paled in comparison to my own creations. I pushed that thought aside, focusing instead on the man kneeling before me, his eyes full of hope and love. Yes, I heard myself say. Yes, I'll marry you. When we returned to Miami, reality came crashing back. Jason's parents insisted on throwing us an engagement party, and I found myself thrust into a world of high society that I'd only ever observed from the outside. The party was a lavish affair at the Randfield mansion. As I circulated among Miami's elite, I couldn't help but feel out of place. These people lived in a different world than I did, a world of old money and ingrained privilege. Vivian Randfield cornered me by the champagne fountain, her smile as sharp as a diamond-tipped saw. Amanda, darling, I must say, we were all quite surprised when Jason announced your engagement. It's not often a Randfield marries outside our social circle. Before I could respond, Jason appeared at my side, placing a protective arm around my waist. Mother, I hope you're not giving Amanda a hard time. Vivian's smile didn't reach her eyes. Of course not, darling. I was just welcoming Amanda to the family. Later that night, as Jason and I slow danced under the crystal chandeliers, he leaned in close. I have an idea, he whispered. Why don't you make a special piece for my mother? As a peace offering. Show her what you can do. I hesitated. The Pierce family secret wasn't something I shared lightly, even with my fiancé. But maybe Jason was right. Maybe this could be a way to bridge the gap between our two worlds. The weeks following our engagement were a whirlwind of wedding planning. I threw myself into creating the perfect necklace for Vivian, hoping it would be the olive branch that could finally win her over. I spent countless hours in my workshop, pouring my heart and soul into the piece. I used rare pink diamonds and a flawless blue sapphire from my father's private collection. It was to be my masterpiece, a testament to my skill and the Pierce family secret. One evening, as I was putting the finishing touches on the clasp, Jason stopped by the workshop. His eyes widened. Amanda, it's incredible. I've never seen anything like it. I felt a surge of pride. Do you think your mother will like it? Jason nodded, his eyes still fixed on the necklace. She'd be a fool not to. The way it catches the light, it's almost otherworldly. I smiled, pleased with his reaction. That's the Pierce touch. The next week, I was at the Randfield mansion for another wedding planning session. Suddenly, I heard raised voices coming from down the hall. I slipped out of the room and followed the sound of the voices. As I got closer, I could make out what they were saying. You're being ridiculous, Jason, came Robert's deep voice. This marriage is a golden opportunity. Don't tell me you're getting cold feet now. It's not like that, Jason protested. But nothing, Vivian's shrill voice cut in. You've done well, darling. She's eating out of the palm of your hand. Soon, we'll have everything we need. I edged closer to the partially open door, my heart pounding in my chest. Through the crack, I could see Jason pacing back and forth, sipping wine from a glass. You should see how eagerly she's making that necklace, he said, and I felt my world tilt on its axis. She has no idea she's handing over the keys to her entire legacy. Vivian's laugh pierced the air like a knife. And to think, we almost objected to you marrying that little nobody. I must say, Jason, your acting skills have improved tremendously. She actually believes you love her. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a gasp. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a mistake. But Robert's next words shattered any lingering doubt. Once we have the Pierce secret, we'll corner the market, he said, his voice filled with smug satisfaction. Who cares if her quaint little shop goes under? It's just business, after all. I felt like I was going to be sick. My vision blurred with unshed tears as the full weight of their betrayal hit me. Jason, the man I thought I loved, the man I had agreed to marry, had been using me all along. The days following my shocking discovery were a blur of emotions and careful planning. On the surface, I played the part of the excited bride-to-be perfectly. I gushed over flower arrangements, fretted about seating charts, and continued work on Vivian's necklace. But inside, I was seething with rage and plotting my revenge. "How's the necklace coming along, darling?" Jason asked one evening, wrapping his arms around me from behind as I worked in my studio. I fought the urge to flinch away from his touch. "Almost done," I replied, forcing a smile. "Your mother is going to love it." Late into the night, after Jason had gone home, I began creating a new collection. Each piece was a work of art, telling the story of betrayal through intricate designs and carefully chosen gems. But jewelry wasn't my only focus. One day, I broke into Jason's home computer and downloaded all the files I could find. I spent hours poring over the Randfield Company documents, looking for any discrepancies or signs of wrongdoing. It was tedious work, but my determination fueled me. One night, as I was going through a stack of financial reports, something caught my eye. The Randfields had been systematically replacing high-quality gems with cheaper alternatives in their jewelry, scamming their customers out of millions. The next challenge was gathering evidence of their plot against me. I bought a small, high-quality recording device and began carrying it with me everywhere. It felt dirty, but I reminded myself that they had started this game. I was just finishing it. As the final week before the wedding arrived, I put the finishing touches on my plan. I had evidence of the Randfields' gem scam, recordings of their plot against me, and a collection that would shock Miami's elite to its core. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect Miami day. As I arrived at the beachfront venue, my heart was pounding, but my resolve was firm. I clutched my velvet-lined case, containing my new collection and all the evidence I'd gathered, like a lifeline. "Amanda, there you are." Jason's best man, Mark, called out as I entered. "Everyone's been looking for you. Are you ready?" I gave him a tight smile. "More ready than you know." As I was ushered into a private room to wait, I could hear the murmur of guests arriving outside. Miami's elite, all gathered to witness what they thought would be the society wedding of the year. If only they knew. The wedding march began to play, and I started my walk down the aisle. Faces turned to watch me, smiling and expectant. I saw Vivian and Robert in the front row, looking smug and satisfied. Jason waited at the altar, beaming at me. But as I reached the altar, instead of taking Jason's hand, I turned to face the assembled guests. "I'm afraid there won't be a wedding today," I announced, my voice clear and strong. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Jason's face contorted in confusion. "Amanda, what are you doing?" I ignored him, addressing the guests instead. "Instead, I'll be unveiling my newest collection, The Art of Betrayal." With that, I opened my case and began to pull out the pieces one by one, explaining the symbolism behind each one. The snake bracelet, representing deceit. The shattered diamond ring, symbolizing broken trust. The color-changing teardrop earrings, reflecting the shifting nature of lies. As I spoke, I saw understanding and horror dawn on the Randfields' faces. But I wasn't done yet. "And for the grand finale," I said, pulling out Vivian's necklace. "A special commission with a hidden message." I held it up to the light, revealing the word liar spelled out in pink diamonds. The crowd gasped again, this time in a mix of shock and admiration. "Amanda, stop this nonsense right now," Robert Randfield bellowed, his face red with anger. But I was beyond stopping. I pulled out the documents I'd gathered, the recordings I'd made. "The Randfields aren't just liars in love," I announced. "They're liars in business too." I proceeded to lay out the evidence of their gem scam, playing recordings of their plot against me and pierced gems. With each revelation, the crowd's murmurs grew louder, shocked faces turning to the Randfields for explanation. "This is preposterous," Vivian shrieked, but her voice was shaking. As security began to escort the sputtering Randfields out, I addressed the crowd one final time. "I stand before you not as a bride, but as a businesswoman protecting her legacy. Pierce Gems will continue to create beauty and brilliance, without compromising our integrity." The aftermath was chaos. Reporters who had come to cover a society wedding found themselves with a much bigger story. Photos of my triumphant face and stunning jewelry splashed across social media and magazines worldwide. In the days following what the press dubbed the wedding that wasn't, my life became a whirlwind of interviews, legal meetings, and damage control. The story had exploded beyond Miami, capturing national attention. My phone rang nonstop with calls from reporters, industry insiders, and even a few Hollywood producers interested in my story. I sat in my workshop, surrounded by half-finished pieces and stacks of newspapers, all featuring my face on the front page. The headlines ranged from "Jewel of Deception," "Heiress Exposes $1 Million Scam," to "Love, Lies, and Luxury, the Pierce Randfield Saga." The Randfield empire crumbled under the weight of the scandal, with multiple lawsuits filed against them. My best friend and now lawyer, Sarah, burst through the door, her arms full of more newspapers and legal documents. "Amanda," she said, dropping everything on my workbench. "We need to talk strategy. The press is having a field day, and we've got at least a dozen interview requests." Over the next few weeks, I carefully chose which interviews to give. I spoke about the importance of transparency in the jewelry business, the need for stricter regulations, and my vision for a more ethical industry. As the weeks turned into months, the media frenzy began to die down, but my resolve only grew stronger. I channeled my energy into Pierce Gems, pushing myself to create more innovative designs while maintaining our commitment to ethical sourcing. One evening, as I was locking up the shop, a woman approached me. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. "Ms. Pierce," she said hesitantly. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to thank you." I tilted my head, confused. "Thank me? For what?" She smiled sadly. "I bought a Randfield piece for my 25th wedding anniversary. After your exposé, I had it appraised. Turns out, the stone wasn't nearly what they claimed it was. Thanks to you, I was able to get my money back." I felt a lump form in my throat. "I'm glad I could help." As she walked away, I realized that my actions had affected real people, not just faceless consumers. The scandal that had nearly destroyed me had instead become the catalyst for positive change. And I, Amanda Pierce, was just getting started. My name is Gina, and this is the story of how my life fell apart and then came back together. I'm 35 years old, and until recently, I thought I had it all figured out. I was the sales director at a large company, married to my college sweetheart, Mark, and we had just bought our first house. After graduation, I landed an entry-level job at a promising startup. I worked my way up the ladder, putting in long hours and sacrificing weekends. It paid off when I was promoted to sales director last year. Mark, on the other hand, had a harder time finding his footing. He bounced between a few jobs before settling as a shift supervisor at a mirror manufacturing company. Our best friends were another couple, Lisa and Tom. We met them at a neighborhood barbecue shortly after moving into our new house. Lisa was a stay-at-home wife, always impeccably dressed and with a spotless home. Tom was a successful entrepreneur who seemed to work as much as I did. When we bought our house, I was the one who qualified for the mortgage. I put it in my name and assumed all the responsibility for the payments. I didn't mind at the time, I was making good money, and I figured Mark would contribute when he could. As time went on, I noticed Mark becoming more and more dissatisfied with his job. He'd come home complaining about his boss, saying things like, "He's always on my case about everything. I can't do anything right," in his eyes. I tried to be supportive. "What happened this time?" I'd ask, setting aside whatever work I'd brought home. He called me out for being 5 minutes late, Mark would huff. "As if that makes a difference." And then he had the nerve to tell me how to talk to the clients. I'd been doing this job for years. I'd listen and nod, but inside I was growing frustrated. These seemed like normal workplace interactions to me, not the personal attacks Mark made them out to be. One day, Mark came home earlier than usual. I was in the middle of a conference call, but excused myself when I saw his face. "What's wrong?" I asked, muting my laptop. "I quit," he said simply. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "You what?" I couldn't take it anymore. My boss made another comment about my attitude, and I just snapped. I told him where he could shove his job and walked out. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the panic rising in my chest. "Mark, we have a mortgage. We can't afford for you to be unemployed right now." He waved off my concern. "I'll find something better. Something where I'm appreciated." I wanted to scream. Instead, I just nodded and went back to my call. After Mark quit his job, our lives changed dramatically. I took on extra shifts and increased my workload, desperate to keep up with our mortgage payments and daily expenses. My days became a blur of meetings, sales calls, and late nights at the office. I was exhausted, but I didn't see any other choice. Meanwhile, Mark seemed to be in no hurry to find new employment. He'd occasionally mention an interview he'd been to, but there was always some reason it wasn't the right fit. The commute would be a nightmare, he'd say, or, the boss seemed like a real jerk. I tried to be patient, but my frustration grew with each passing day. One evening, I came home late to find Mark lounging on the couch, watching TV. "Hey," I said, dropping my bag by the door. "Have you eaten?" He looked up at me, frowning. "No, I was waiting for you to cook something." I stared at him in disbelief. "Mark, it's 9 p.m. I've been working since 7 this morning. Why didn't you make dinner?" "Because that's your job," he snapped. "You're never home anymore, Gina. The house is a mess, there's no food in the fridge, and I can't remember the last time we had a proper meal together." I felt my temper rising. "My job? My job is keeping a roof over our heads and food on the table." "What exactly is your job right now, Mark?" "I'm looking for work," he shouted. "Do you think I enjoy sitting around all day? But I'm not going to settle for just any job. I deserve better than that." I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "I understand that, but we can't afford for you to be so picky right now. We have bills to pay." "Always about the money with you," he muttered. "What happened to supporting each other through thick and thin?" "I am supporting us," I said quietly. "But I need you to meet me halfway. Please, just try harder to find something. Anything. We can reassess once we're more stable." Mark didn't respond. He just turned back to the TV, effectively ending the conversation. I went to bed hungry and angry that night, wondering how much longer I could keep this up. The next day, I met Lisa for coffee during my lunch break. She looked fresh and relaxed, her hair perfectly styled and her nails freshly manicured. "Gina, honey, you look exhausted," she said, concern in her voice. "Are you getting any sleep at all?" I sighed, sipping my double espresso. "Not much. Work's been crazy, and things at home are tense." Lisa reached out and patted my hand. "You're working too hard. You need to take care of yourself, relax a little. Tom always says a happy wife makes for a happy life." I bit back a retort. Lisa meant well, but she had no idea what my life was like. "It's not that simple for us right now," I said instead. "But I'm sure things will get better soon." As the weeks went by, the tension in our house grew thicker. Mark's job search seemed to be going nowhere, and I was stretching myself thin, trying to keep everything afloat. Our conversations, when we had them, were short and often ended in arguments. One evening, I came home to find Mark dressed up, ready to go out. "Where are you going?" I asked, surprised. "Out with the guys," he replied, not meeting my eyes. "We're going to play golf." "Golf? At this hour?" I was skeptical, but too tired to argue. "Whatever. Have fun." As he left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. But I pushed it aside, focusing instead on the mountain of work I'd brought home. The next day, I decided I needed a break. I took a rare day off from work and planned to surprise Mark with a weekend getaway. When I called to tell him, he seemed distracted. "This weekend? I can't. I've got plans with the guys again." I felt my heart sink. "Again? Can't you reschedule?" "No, it's important. Sorry, babe." He hung up before I could respond. Frustrated and hurt, I called Lisa. Maybe she and Tom would want to do something. "Oh, Gina," Lisa's voice was apologetic. "We'd love to, but Tom and I are visiting my parents this weekend." "Rain check?" I agreed, trying not to sound as disappointed as I felt. It seemed like everyone had plans except me. On a whim, I decided to go shopping. Maybe a little retail therapy would lift my spirits. As I was browsing through a department store, I heard a familiar voice. "Gina, what are you doing here?" I turned to see Tom, Lisa's husband, looking surprised and slightly uncomfortable. "Tom, I thought you and Lisa were visiting her parents this weekend?" His brow furrowed in confusion. "Her parents? No, we didn't have any plans. Lisa said she was spending the night at your place." My blood ran cold. "What? No, she's not with me. She told me you two were out of town." We found a quiet cafe and sat down. Tom looked grim as he spoke. "I've had suspicions for a while now," he said. "Lisa's been acting strange, always on her phone, making excuses to go out. I think our spouses might be having an affair." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I couldn't breathe. "No," I whispered. "They wouldn't." But even as I said it, pieces started falling into place. Mark's mysterious outings, Lisa's constant presence in our home, the way they looked at each other. Tom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm going to hire a private investigator. We need to know for sure. And we don't let on that we suspect anything. Can you do that, Gina?" I took a deep breath and straightened my shoulders. Yes, I can." As I drove home that evening, my mind was reeling. How had I not seen this coming? I walked into our house, half expecting to catch Mark and Lisa in the act. But the house was empty and quiet. Mark came home late, smelling of alcohol and mumbling about a great game of golf. The next 2 weeks were excruciating. I went through the motions of daily life, pretending everything was normal, while my insides churned with suspicion and dread. Mark continued his golf outings and job hunting charade, and I feigned belief in his increasingly transparent lies. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "We need to talk. Meet me at the cafe in an hour." My heart raced as I made an excuse to leave work early. When I arrived at the cafe, Tom was already there, a thick manila envelope on the table in front of him. He slid the envelope across to me without further ado. With trembling hands, I opened it and began to look through the contents. There were photographs, credit card statements, hotel receipts, and transcripts of text messages. It was all there in black and white, irrefutable evidence of Mark and Lisa's betrayal. "How long?" I managed to choke out. Tom's voice was flat. "At least 6 months, according to the investigator. Maybe longer." I felt like I might be sick. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of me working myself to the bone while Mark. "There's more," Tom said quietly. "Gina, you need to check your bank accounts. All of them." Confused, I pulled out my phone and logged into my banking app. What I saw made my blood run cold. My savings account, the one I'd been quietly building up for years as an emergency fund, was empty. With shaking fingers, I checked my credit card balance, which I had given Mark to pay for gasoline. Maxed out. "He's been funding their little adventure with your money," Tom said, his voice tight with anger. "Fancy dinners, hotel rooms, gifts for Lisa. All on your dime." The shock gave way to a fury I'd never experienced before. All those times I'd come home exhausted, All the extra hours I'd put in, all the sacrifices I'd made, and this is how Mark repaid me? What are you going to do? I asked Tom, my voice surprisingly steady. He leaned back, a cold smile on his face. I'm going to divorce Lisa and take her for everything she's worth. And then some. He paused, looking at me intently. The question is, what are you going to do, Gina? I took a deep breath, my mind racing. I want revenge, I said slowly. But I want them to suffer. I want them to feel as humiliated and betrayed as I do right now. Tom nodded approvingly. I was hoping you'd say that. I have an idea, but it's going to take some planning. Over the next hour, Tom and I hatched a plan. It was devious, it was cruel, and it was exactly what Mark and Lisa deserved. That night, when Mark came home, I greeted him with a smile. Hey, honey, I said, kissing his cheek. Listen, I was thinking, why don't we throw a party next weekend? To celebrate our friendship with Tom and Lisa. It's been a while since we all got together. Mark's eyes lit up. Yeah, that sounds fun. I'm sure Lisa would love to help plan it. As I turned away, ostensibly to start dinner, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. Mark and Lisa had no idea that their perfect little world was about to come crashing down around them. The week leading up to the party was a masterclass in deception. I threw myself into the preparations with a manic energy, playing the role of the perfect hostess. I called Lisa daily, discussing menu plans and decorations, all while picturing the look on her face when her world fell apart. The day of the party arrived, and our house was transformed. I had outdone myself with the decorations and food, determined that everything should be perfect for the grand finale. Guests started arriving in the early evening. I played the gracious host, making small talk and ensuring everyone's glasses were full. Tom arrived alone, explaining that Lisa would be there shortly. She was picking up a special dessert. When Lisa finally swept in, she was the picture of domestic perfection. Her hair was immaculate, her dress flattering, and in her arms was an elaborate cake. Sorry I'm late, she trilled, air-kissing my cheek. I wanted everything to be just right. As the evening progressed, I watched Mark and Lisa carefully. To the casual observer, there was nothing untoward in their interactions. But now that I knew what to look for, their stolen glances and subtle touches were glaringly obvious. Finally, as the sky outside darkened, Tom stood up and clinked his glass for attention. Everyone, if I could have your attention please, he said, his voice carrying across the room. Gina and I have prepared a little entertainment for you all. If you'd like to gather outside, we've set up a screen for an interesting film. There was a murmur of excitement as our guests filed out onto the back lawn. Mark looked at me, confused. What's this about? He asked. I smiled sweetly. Oh, just a little trip down memory lane. Come on, you don't want to miss this. Outside, everyone settled onto blankets and chairs, facing the large screen we'd set up. Tom started the projector, and at first, it showed innocent scenes, the four of us on various outings, laughing and having fun. I saw Lisa relax, probably thinking this was just a sentimental slideshow. How wrong she was. Suddenly, the music changed, becoming darker, more ominous. The images on the screen shifted, showing Mark and Lisa in various compromising positions, leaving hotels together, kissing in a car, entering our house when I was at work. A collective gasp went up from the audience. I heard Lisa's mother let out a strangled cry. Mark jumped to his feet. What the hell is this? He demanded. I stood up slowly, my voice ice cold as I addressed the stunned crowd. This, ladies and gentlemen, is what betrayal looks like. While Tom and I worked ourselves to the bone, our spouses were carrying on an affair behind our backs. Lisa was sobbing now, mascara running down her face. Gina, please, I can explain. Explain? I cut her off. Explain how you've been sleeping with my husband for months. Explain how you've been spending my hard-earned money on your little trysts. Tom stepped forward, his face grim. Lisa, don't bother coming home. I've already changed the locks. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. The party dissolved into chaos. Guests were whispering furiously among themselves. Lisa's parents were berating her, her father's face purple with rage. As the shocked murmurs of the guests subsided, I steeled myself for what I knew I had to do next. I walked back into the house, retrieved the manila envelope from my desk drawer, and returned to the lawn. Mark was still standing there, looking shell-shocked and pale. I thrust the envelope into his hands. "Here are the divorce papers, Mark. I want you out of my house tonight, and I'll be demanding compensation from both you and Lisa for your betrayal." Mark fumbled with the envelope, his hands shaking. "Gina, please, we can talk about this. I can explain." "There's nothing to explain," I cut him off coldly. "You've said enough with your actions. Now leave." He stood there, divorce papers in hand, looking as if he'd been slapped. Guests were approaching me, offering sympathetic words and support. In the middle of the lawn, Lisa had sunk to her knees, mascara running down her face as she pleaded with Tom. "Please, Tom, don't divorce me. I made a mistake. We can work through this." To my surprise, Mark rushed over to Lisa. He grabbed her arm and hissed, "Get up. Don't humiliate yourself like this. We can start over, make a new life together." Lisa's tear-streaked face contorted with fury. She yanked her arm away from Mark and spat, "Start over? With you? I don't need an unemployed man who can only pay compliments. I need someone who can actually support me." As the last of the guests trickled out, offering final words of support, Tom approached me. His face was a mask of controlled anger, but his voice was gentle when he spoke to me. "Gina, if you need any help, legal, financial, anything, please don't hesitate to call me. We're in this together, okay?" I nodded, grateful for his support. "Thank you, Tom. The same goes for you." As Tom left, I turned to Mark, who was standing alone, looking lost. "I want you gone by morning. Leave your keys on the kitchen counter." I turned my back on him and walked into the house, closing the door firmly behind me. Through the window, I watched as he slowly made his way down the driveway and out of sight. The house felt eerily quiet after the chaos of the evening. I sank onto the couch, emotionally and physically exhausted. Tears threatened to spill, but I held them back. I was sad, yes, mourning the death of my marriage and what I thought was a close friendship. But underlying that sadness was a sense of calm, even relief. For months, I had been carrying the weight of an unemployed, dissatisfied husband. I had worked myself to the bone, trying to keep our life afloat while he contributed nothing but complaints. Now, that burden was lifted. Yes, the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, I felt free. In the weeks following the explosive revelation at the party, life took on a new rhythm. I threw myself into work, finding solace in the familiar routine of sales reports and client meetings. But unlike before, I made sure to maintain a healthier balance, reducing my overtime and actually using my vacation days. One afternoon, as I was leaving the office, I ran into Tom. He looked tired but determined. "Gina," he greeted me with a nod. "How are you holding up?" I managed a small smile. "I'm doing okay. How about you? Any news?" Tom's face hardened. "The divorce is final. I kicked Lisa out of the house last week." I wasn't surprised, but I still felt a twinge of something. Not quite sympathy, but a sense of shared experience. "How did she take it?" He shrugged. "Not well. Apparently, her parents meant what they said at the party. They refused to take her in or help her financially." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? That seems harsh. They're old-fashioned. Adultery is a big deal to them." Tom sighed. "Last I heard, she's working as a sales clerk at some department store downtown." The irony wasn't lost on me. Lisa, who had always looked down on my career, was now forced to work a job she would have considered beneath her. "What goes around comes around, I suppose," I murmured. Tom nodded grimly. "How are things with Mark?" I rolled my eyes. "He won't stop calling and texting. Keeps begging for another chance. But I feel nothing. The love, the trust, it's all gone. I can't imagine ever wanting to be with him again. We parted ways, and as I drove home, I reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. The next day, I met with my lawyer to discuss the progress of my own divorce proceedings. She greeted me with a triumphant smile. "Good news, Gina. The judge has reviewed the evidence, including the detective's report, and has ruled in our favor on all counts." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," my lawyer said, "that Mark has been ordered to pay you substantial compensation for his infidelity. Moreover, he's required to repay every cent he took from your reserve account and credit card for his affair with Lisa." As I left the lawyer's office, I felt lighter than I had in years. With the compensation and repayment from Mark, I was able to pay off the remainder of my mortgage in one fell swoop. The house was now truly, fully mine. That evening, as I was celebrating my newfound financial freedom with a glass of wine, my phone buzzed. It was Mark, again. "Gina, please," his message read. "I know I messed up, but I love you. Can't we try to work things out? I'll do anything." I stared at the message for a long moment. Once, those words might have moved me. Now, they just left me cold. I typed out a response. "Mark, stop contacting me. It's over. I don't love you anymore, and I don't want to try again. Please respect my decision and leave me alone." I hit send and then blocked his number. It felt final, decisive. And it felt good. Life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. Just when I thought I had everything figured out, that I was content with my newfound independence, fate threw me another curveball. It started innocently enough. Tom and I had been in regular contact since our respective divorces, offering each other support and companionship during this challenging time. One evening, about 2 months after my divorce was finalized, Tom called me. "Hey Gina," he said, his voice warm. "I was thinking, we've both been through hell lately. How about we celebrate our new beginnings? I could bring over a bottle of wine, and we could toast to our freedom." I hesitated for a moment, but then thought, why not? "Sure, Tom. That sounds nice. Come over around 8? When Tom arrived, bottle of expensive red wine in hand, I was struck by how different he looked. Gone was the stressed, angry man I'd seen at the fateful party. He seemed lighter, more relaxed. He'd even gotten a haircut that suited him well. We settled on my patio, the warm summer evening wrapping around us like a comfortable blanket. As we sipped our wine, our conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and moments of shared understanding. "You know," Tom said, refilling our glasses, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm actually grateful for what happened. It opened my eyes to so much." I nodded, understanding completely. "I know what you mean. It's like, we're finally free to be ourselves." As the night wore on and the wine bottle emptied, I found myself noticing things about Tom I'd never paid attention to before. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle timbre of his laugh, the strength in his hands as he gestured while talking. I'm not sure who made the first move. One moment we were laughing about some shared memory, and the next, we were kissing. That night, Tom and I crossed a line we'd never even considered before. When morning came, I woke up to find Tom already awake, watching me with a mixture of affection and uncertainty. "Gina," he said softly, "about last night. Last night was unexpected, but it felt right. Maybe we could date? Take things slow, see where this leads?" I found myself nodding, a smile spreading across my face. "I'd like that, Tom." Over the next few weeks, Tom and I embarked on a new journey together. We went on proper dates, dinners, movies, long walks in the park. To my surprise, Tom revealed a romantic side I'd never seen before. He brought me flowers, left sweet notes for me to find, and always seemed to know just what to say to make me smile. "You know," I said to Tom one evening as we cuddled on my couch, "I never would have predicted this." He chuckled, pressing a kiss to my temple. Life's full of surprises, isn't it? But I have to say, this is one surprise I'm very grateful for. As I snuggled closer to him, I found myself agreeing wholeheartedly. We weren't looking too far into the future yet, both of us knew the importance of living in the present. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about what that future might hold. I'm Natalie, and at 35, I thought I had my life figured out. As an interior designer, I poured my heart and soul into transforming spaces. My small apartment was my sanctuary, a place where I could retreat from the world and just be myself. Losing my parents early on wasn't easy, but it taught me to be self-reliant. I got used to the quiet evenings, the solitude that comes with being alone. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't some hermit hiding from the world. I had friends, colleagues, and a career I loved. But serious relationships? They weren't on my radar. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I flopped onto my couch and started scrolling through my social media. It was a mindless habit, one that helped me unwind. That's when I saw the message. Hey there, Natalie. Your designs are incredible. Have you ever thought about doing commercial spaces? I paused, my thumb hovering over the screen. The profile picture showed a handsome guy with a warm smile. Jake Thompson, 38, business owner. I hesitated for a moment before replying. Thanks, Jake. I've done a few commercial projects, but I mostly focus on residential spaces. Why do you ask? And just like that, we started chatting. At first, it was all business. He owned a small transportation company and was thinking about revamping his office. But as the days went by, our conversations drifted to other topics. Movies, books, our favorite spots in the city. It was easy, effortless. A week into our chats, Jake threw me a curveball. Natalie, I've really enjoyed talking to you. Would you like to grab coffee sometime? No pressure, just thought it'd be nice to meet in person. I stared at the message, my heart doing a little flip. Sure, why not? There's a great little cafe near my office. How about Saturday at 2? Saturday rolled around, and I found myself standing in front of my closet, suddenly aware of how much of my wardrobe consisted of work clothes. I settled on a casual sundress, something that said I made an effort, but I'm not trying too hard. The cafe was buzzing when I arrived. I scanned the room, my eyes landing on Jake. He was even more handsome in person, with kind eyes and an easy smile. He stood up when he saw me, waving me over. Natalie, it's great to finally meet you, he said, his voice warm and genuine. Likewise, I replied, sliding into the seat across from him. I hope you haven't been waiting long. And just like that, we fell into conversation. Jake was attentive, asking thoughtful questions about my work. He told me about his transportation company, the challenges of managing a fleet of trucks and drivers. Time flew by, and before I knew it, we'd been talking for hours. As we left the cafe, Jake turned to me. I had a great time, Natalie. Would you like to do this again sometime? I found myself nodding before I even realized it. Yeah, I'd like that. Over the next few weeks, Jake and I started seeing each other regularly. Our coffee dates turned into dinners, and soon we were spending most of our free time together. There was something about Jake that made me feel at ease. He was confident without being arrogant, smart without being condescending. As the months passed, our relationship deepened. Jake introduced me to his mother, Sarah, a kind woman in her 60s who had recently suffered a stroke. She lived with Jake in a modest house on the outskirts of town. Mom, this is Natalie, Jake said, his arm around my waist. Sarah's face lit up. Oh, Jake's told me so much about you. Come in, come in. Despite her condition, Sarah was warm and welcoming. We spent the afternoon chatting, and I found myself growing fond of her. It was clear that Jake was devoted to his mother, and seeing this softer side of him made me fall for him even more. As we were leaving, Sarah pulled me aside. You're good for him, Natalie. I haven't seen Jake this happy in years." Her words stayed with me, warming my heart. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was part of something bigger than myself. Our relationship wasn't without its challenges. Jake's work often kept him busy, and there were times when I felt like I was competing with his company for attention. But he always made time for me, surprising me with lunch dates or leaving sweet notes in my apartment. A year flew by in a whirlwind of love and laughter. On our anniversary, Jake took me to the same cafe where we had our first date. As we finished our meal, he reached across the table and took my hand. "Natalie," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "This past year has been the best of my life. You brought so much joy and love into my world. I can't imagine my life without you." My breath caught in my throat as he got down on one knee, pulling out a small velvet box. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded, unable to speak. Jake slipped the ring onto my finger, and the cafe erupted in applause. As we left, hand in hand, I couldn't stop staring at the ring. It was beautiful, but more than that, it represented a future I never thought I'd have. We decided to have a small wedding, just close friends and family. Sarah was overjoyed, insisting on helping with the planning, despite her health issues. The day of the wedding was perfect. As I walked down the aisle, seeing Jake's face light up, I knew I had made the right decision. We exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other through whatever life threw our way. At the reception, Sarah pulled me aside, her eyes glistening with tears. "Welcome to the family, dear," she said, hugging me tightly. After the wedding, Jake and I decided to move into Sarah's house. It made sense, she needed care, and the house was spacious enough for all of us. I rented out my apartment, packing up my life into cardboard boxes, with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The first few months of marriage were blissful. Jake was attentive and loving, always ready with a kiss or a kind word. Sarah and I grew closer, bonding over our shared love of gardening and cooking. It felt like I had gained not just a husband, but a mother as well. Determined to help Sarah recover from her stroke, I hired a massage therapist and a therapeutic gymnastics coach. The improvements were slow, but steady. Within a few months, Sarah was walking normally, even starting to putter around in the garden and cook meals. As for Jake and me, we were in no rush to have children. We both wanted to focus on our careers and enjoy our time together. But as our first wedding anniversary approached, I noticed a subtle shift in Jake's behavior. He started staying late at work more often, citing issues with drivers or last-minute client requests. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, running a business wasn't easy, and I often worked late hours myself. One Saturday morning, as I was enjoying my coffee and a good book, Jake announced he had to go into the office. "On a weekend?" I asked, surprised. He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Yeah, some paperwork I need to catch up on. Don't wait up for me, okay?" As he left, I felt a twinge of unease. But I pushed it aside, focusing instead on my plans for the day. It was Sarah who first voiced her concerns. We were in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when she broached the subject. "Natalie, dear," she began, her voice hesitant. "Have you noticed Jake's been working a lot lately? You should keep an eye on him, you know. Don't let him take you for granted." I turned to her, surprised. "What do you mean?" She sighed, looking suddenly older. "Men, sometimes they get restless. They forget what they have at home." Her words sent a chill through me. Was she speaking from experience? I wanted to ask, but something in her expression held me back. That night, as I lay in bed waiting for Jake to come home, Sarah's words echoed in my mind. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that something might be wrong. When Jake finally crawled into bed in the early hours of the morning, I pretended to be asleep. He smelled of cigarette smoke and, was that perfume? My stomach churned, but I kept my eyes closed, my breathing steady. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't live with this uncertainty, this growing doubt. I needed to know the truth, whatever it might be. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and searched for private investigators in our area. It felt wrong, a betrayal of trust, but the alternative, living with this gnawing suspicion, seemed worse. I found a highly rated agency and made an appointment for later that week. As I hung up, I felt a mix of relief and dread. Soon, I told myself, I would have answers. Whether I would like those answers was another matter entirely. The detective's office was small and cluttered, with files stacked haphazardly on every surface. The detective himself, a grizzled man in his 50s, introduced himself as Mike. I laid out everything, the late nights, the weekend work, the subtle changes in Jake's behavior. As I spoke, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. It felt good to voice my fears, to have someone listen without judgment. "All right," Mike said when I finished. "Here's what we'll do. We'll track his movements for a few weeks, see if we can establish a pattern. If he's up to something, we'll find out." 3 weeks later, my phone rang. It was Mike. "Mrs. Thompson, I think you should come to my office. I have some information for you." The drive to his office was a blur. My hand shook as I parked, and I had to take a moment to compose myself before going in. Mike was waiting for me, a thick file on his desk. His expression was grim. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson," he began, and my heart sank. "But your suspicions were correct. Your husband has been unfaithful." He pushed the file towards me. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside were photos, text messages, hotel receipts. Evidence of not one affair, but several. Jake had been seeing multiple women, juggling them with what appeared to be a carefully planned schedule. "He's been meeting them at various hotels," Mike explained gently. "Always on different days of the week. It seems he's been doing this for quite some time." I stared at the photos, unable to process what I was seeing. There was Jake, my Jake, with his arm around a blonde woman I'd never seen before. Another showed him kissing a redhead outside a restaurant. My stomach churned. I left Mike's office in a daze, the file clutched to my chest. As I drove home, tears blurred my vision. How could Jake do this to me? To us? What about our vows, our promises? When I pulled into our driveway, I saw that Jake's car wasn't there. Of course not. It was Thursday, according to Mike's report, that was his night with the blonde. Sarah was in the living room when I came in. One look at my face, and she knew. "Oh, Natalie," she said softly. "What happened?" I couldn't hold it in anymore. I collapsed onto the couch next to her and told her everything, my suspicions, hiring the detective, what I'd learned. Sarah reached out, gently taking the file from my hands and setting it aside. Her eyes, filled with a mixture of concern and determination, met mine. "You need to rest, dear. You can't make any decisions in this state. A clear mind is what you need now." I nodded numbly, allowing her to guide me to my feet and towards the stairs. As I climbed each step, I felt as though I was moving through molasses, my body heavy with the burden of my newfound knowledge. "We'll talk more tomorrow," Sarah promised as she saw me to my room. "Try to get some sleep." Sleep, however, proved elusive. I tossed and turned all night, my mind replaying every moment of my marriage, searching for clues I might have missed. When dawn finally broke, I gave up on rest and got ready for work. Work was a blur. I moved through the day on autopilot, my colleagues' concerned glances bouncing off the protective shell I'd built around myself. As the office emptied out for the evening, I remained at my desk, unable to face the thought of going home. It was dark by the time I finally left, the streets quiet as I made my way back to the house. As I turned onto our street, a strange sight greeted me. The garage door was wide open, and I could hear the rumble of an engine. Suddenly, Sarah came tearing out of the garage in Jake's pickup truck, the tires screeching as she swerved onto the street. My heart leapt into my throat as she barreled towards me, but at the last moment, she slammed on the brakes. "Natalie," she shouted, her voice sharp with urgency. "Get in the car. Now." Bewildered and alarmed by the wild look in her eyes, I obeyed without question, scrambling into the passenger seat. No sooner had I closed the door than Sarah floored the accelerator, the truck lurching forward with a roar. In the rearview mirror, I saw Jake burst out of the house, his face contorted with rage. He ran after us, shouting and cursing, but Sarah didn't slow down. We tore down the street, leaving him behind. I turned to Sarah, my heart pounding. "What's going on?" I demanded, but the words died in my throat when I saw her expression. She looked terrified, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. We drove in tense silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only about 30 minutes. I didn't dare speak, afraid of breaking Sarah's concentration as she navigated the darkening roads. Finally, Sarah pulled into the parking lot of a roadside diner. She scanned the area carefully before killing the engine, her body still tense. "Come on," she said, her voice low and urgent. "We need to talk." Inside the diner, we slid into a booth in the far corner. Sarah ordered coffee for both of us, her eyes constantly darting to the door. When the waitress left, Sarah leaned across the table, speaking in a hushed, frantic whisper. "Natalie, listen to me carefully. We're in danger. An hour ago, I overheard Jake on the phone. He was talking about getting rid of us, Natalie. Both of us." I stared at her in shock, my mind reeling from her words. The idea that Jake could be planning to get rid of us seemed too outlandish to be true. Sarah must have sensed my disbelief, because her expression shifted from fear to determination. "You don't believe me," she said, not as a question, but a statement. Without waiting for my response, she reached into her purse and pulled out Jake's phone. "I found this in his car when I was leaving. Look for yourself." Together, Sarah and I huddled over the small screen, scrolling through Jake's messages. My heart sank as we came across a conversation with someone labeled NH Director. As we read, the truth of Sarah's words became clearer. Jake wasn't planning to kill us, but his intentions were far from innocent. He was in talks with the director of a state nursing home, discussing ways to have Sarah declared incapacitated and admitted against her will. "Oh my God," I whispered, quickly searching for reviews of the nursing home. What I found made my blood run cold. Neglect, abuse, unsanitary conditions, the stories were nightmarish. I looked up at Sarah, who seemed relieved. But as I read her some of the worst accounts, Sarah's relief turned to anger. "That's not living," she spat. "It's a slow death. It might as well be murder." But Jake's betrayal didn't end there. As we continued to scroll, we found messages to multiple women, his mistresses. The sheer number was staggering, but what hurt the most were his words about me. "Once Mom's out of the way, I'll leave Natalie," one message read. "I'm tired of playing house. I want my freedom." I felt sick, but forced myself to keep reading, copying the messages to my email as evidence. Sarah and I sat in disgusted silence, the weight of Jake's betrayal hanging heavy between us. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "I should have seen this coming," she said. "Jake's father, he cheated on me too. 4 years. He even had another family, 2 kids I didn't know about until it was too late." My jaw dropped. "Sarah, I had no idea." She nodded sadly. I turned a blind eye to it all. I loved him, and I was afraid he'd leave us if I confronted him. I hoped Jake would be different. That seeing his father's mistakes would make him a better man. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "But he's been this way since he was young. Always charming, always with a new girl on his arm. I lost count of how many hearts he broke. When he married you, Natalie, I thought he'd finally grown up. I was so happy." I took a deep breath. "I'm going to divorce him. I can't stay with someone who would do this to us." Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. Then, to my surprise, she began to cry softly. "Please," she whispered, "don't leave me. I can't face this alone." Without hesitation, I moved to her side of the booth, wrapping my arms around her. "I'm not going anywhere, Sarah. We're family, and we'll get through this together. I promise. As Sarah and I sat in the diner booth, emotionally drained from our discoveries, I felt a weight pressing on my chest. There was one more piece of news I needed to share, something that complicated our situation even further. Sarah, I began, my voice barely above a whisper, there's something else you should know. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I'm pregnant. I found out just this morning at work. I don't know what to do. Sarah's expression hardened, a fierce determination replacing her initial shock. I'll tell you what we're going to do, she said, her voice strong and resolute. We're going to fight back. Jake doesn't get to destroy our lives and walk away unscathed. It's time we took control. We paid for our coffee and headed back to the truck. The drive home was tense, but filled with a sense of purpose. As we pulled into the driveway, I saw Jake's car parked haphazardly, a clear sign of his agitated state. Taking a deep breath, Sarah and I entered the house. Jake was pacing in the living room, his face contorted with rage. As soon as he saw us, he exploded. Mom, what the hell were you thinking, taking off with my truck? And my phone? Have you lost your mind? Before Sarah could respond, I stepped forward, my heart pounding, but my resolve firm. I held up the file from the private investigator. Jake, we need to talk. His eyes darted from me to the file, realization dawning on his face. For a moment, he looked panicked, but then his expression smoothed into one of cool indifference. So, you know, he said, his voice eerily calm. What are you going to do about it, Natalie? Divorce me? Yes, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. I want a divorce. To my shock, Jake laughed. Come on, Natalie. You're overreacting. So I had a few flings. It doesn't mean anything. You're not enough for me, but we can make this work. You can stay, be a good wife, and I'll be discreet with my extracurricular activities. I felt a surge of anger and disgust. You must be joking. I don't need a Ravella like you in my life, Jake. We're done. Jake's face darkened. He pointed to the door, his voice low and menacing. Fine. Get out. This is my house, and I want you gone. Before I could respond, Sarah stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. Actually, Jake, this is my house. I own it, and I decide who stays and who goes. She took a deep breath. And I'm telling you to leave. Now. Jake's jaw dropped, disbelief written all over his face. Mom, what are you saying? I'm your son. And Natalie? She's nothing to you. Sarah's grip on my hand tightened. You're wrong, Jake. Natalie is like a daughter to me. She's family. Then, with a pointed look at me, she added, and she's carrying my grandchild. Jake's eyes widened, darting to my stomach. For a moment, hope flickered across his face. You're pregnant? Then I can't leave home. The baby needs a father. I shook my head, my resolve stronger than ever. This child doesn't need a father like you, Jake. We'll be fine without you. Sarah nodded in agreement. You heard her, Jake. It's time for you to go. We'll have the locks changed in the morning. Jake looked from Sarah to me, realization dawning that he had lost this battle. Without another word, he stormed upstairs, presumably to pack his things. As the sound of his angry footsteps faded, I turned to Sarah, overwhelmed by the events of the day. She pulled me into a tight hug, and I felt the tension begin to leave my body. The months following that fateful night were a whirlwind of legal battles, emotional turmoil, and new beginnings. The divorce proceedings were messy, as expected, but with the mountain of evidence we had gathered, Jake didn't stand a chance. I sat in the courtroom, my hand resting protectively over my growing belly, as the judge delivered her verdict. Jake's numerous infidelities, coupled with his attempts to manipulate Sarah's living situation, worked heavily in my favor. The judge's stern voice echoed through the room as she awarded me a substantial compensation package. Mr. Thompson, she said, her eyes boring into Jake, your actions have been reprehensible. This court finds in favor of Mrs. Thompson and orders you to pay compensation for emotional distress. I watched Jake's face contort with anger and disbelief. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness for the man I thought I had married. But as I caught Sarah's supportive gaze from the gallery, I knew we had made the right decision. After the court proceedings, Sarah and I sat in her kitchen, our kitchen now, sipping tea and processing the day's events. "I've made some changes to my will," Sarah said suddenly, sliding a document across the table to me. I skimmed the paper, my eyes widening as I realized what I was reading. "Sarah, you can't. This is too much." She reached out, clasping my hand in hers. "Natalie, you and that baby are my family now. Jake, he made his choices. I've disinherited him. The house, my savings, they're yours and my grandson's now." As my due date approached, Sarah and I spent our evenings preparing the nursery. One night, as we folded tiny onesies and arranged stuffed animals, Sarah turned to me with a serious expression. "Natalie," she said, her voice soft but determined, "I want you to know that we're going to raise this boy right. He's going to grow up to be a man who respects women, who understands the value of loyalty and honesty." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. "You're right. He won't have his father around, but maybe that's for the best. He won't have to see that negative example." Sarah's eyes misted over. "I made mistakes with Jake. I let him see his father's behavior and didn't do enough to counteract it. But this time it'll be different. This little boy will grow up surrounded by strong women who won't tolerate disrespect or infidelity."